Hey guys, how you doing? Hope you having good day. In this video, I am gonna talk about what if Deku inherited his father's quirk and unlocked a new power. Part 2. And subscribe for more, also like this video, that will be super duper awesome, helps me to stay motivated. And thanks to the author of this story, this video is possible. So do check out. And show some love, name of this fanfic is Unexpected Fate by CinnamonVanilla. So do check out the author of this story and check out entire work. Also if you have any complaints about videos, feel free to comment, I will try to improve them. Let's jump in video. Aizawa, Izuku and Yagi sat at the dining table in silence as Aizawa glared at them, both waiting for an explanation. Yagi couldn't really find the right words to describe the last few weeks between Izuku and him without sounding crazy. Izuku looked at him with a grimace as he sent him the feeling of understanding and sympathy. Yagi smiled and sent him back the feeling of reassurance, while Aizawa looked between them, both having a wordless conversation right in front of him. Are you two just gonna stare at each other all day, or is someone going to explain why I'm seeing my dead student as if he were alive, he said impatiently. Snapping out of their silent communication, they quickly apologized and started to try to explain their new bond. Yagi went over how Izuku first appeared to him and his sudden use of one for all when facing Hisashi. Wait, you used your quirk again? Aizawa said in disbelief. Yeah, but only for a split second, and when I did, it was almost like I was pulling it from another source. Wait, that was you, Izuku said in sudden realization. When me and mom were coming home on the bus after we died, I felt a large pull in my stomach like a rope was tugging on me from the inside. I also felt a lot of anger, but I never would have guessed that I was feeling you. Yagi eyes widened at Izuku, you felt me use one for all. Izuku began to mumble to himself about his own theories until both of his teachers gained his attention again. He apologized and blushed as he explained his experience. Well, I didn't exactly know it was you specifically using one for all because all I felt was the pulling sensation with anger. Although, my quirk activated by itself, which was pretty alarming. I just thought it was a side effect of dying, but I wasn't sure. Yagi looked at him with curiosity as more questions popped into his head, but Aizawa interrupted before he could ask. So let me get this straight. You two have this weird mysterious supernatural bond that allows you to not only communicate with each other almost telepathically, but gives All Might the ability to use his quirk again? Aizawa asked ludicrously. Yagi shrugged Izuku, and I don't know what's happening either, but whatever it is, it's allowing Izuku to stay visible. I don't want to poke the bear and cause this to end by accident because I won't go through losing again. I won't survive it, Yagi said with fear and sadness. Izuku felt his dad's grief seep through their bond as he got up to hug him to remind him that he was there. He learned that his dad needed physical contact to get out of a depressive spiral just like him. Toshinori quickly pulled him onto his lap as Izuku pushed his face in the space between his shoulder and neck. I knew you two were close, but clearly I underestimated the depth of it, Aizawa said unimpressed. Again I know you two don't understand why either, but someone has to know at least a bit of information about what's happening. Yagi thought a bit about some odd contacts that could maybe answer some of his various questions, and one did come to mind. Well, I know of one person that could maybe help, but it's actually her sister we would need to talk to. She's into the spiritual world and has studied on paranormal situations like this before. It would be a long shot though because I don't really know the extent of what she does. Long shots are all we have now, this whole thing is beyond even my comprehension, Aizawa replied honesty. Although, I want to talk about this to Principal Nezu, maybe we'll be lucky and he'll say he's seen this before. Besides, there needs to be more people other than me knowing about this before I start thinking I'm going insane. Well, I was thinking about telling everyone about what's happening anyway, so they aren't as sad about me dying, and all Izuku chimed in. Yagi tightened his hold. Are you sure, son? We haven't really tested if you can hold solidity away from me, he said uncertain. Aizawa rolled his eyes, don't listen to him Midoriya, he just doesn't feel like sharing you yet, Aizawa said as he glared at Yagi for being too possessive. Izuku looked at his dad as if looking for confirmation and was surprised to see a large blush making its way down his neck and face. That's not it, shouted. We've just never tried separating after everything, and I don't know if he'll even be able to keep his form intact if he strayed from me, he said flustered. Well, we should try leaving at some point so we don't accidentally seclude ourselves. I also really do want to know how this is all happening, and if you know someone who could give us answers, then maybe I can learn more about my limitations, Izuku said slightly blushing himself. Aizawa just rolled his eyes again as he went to the front door. Whatever you two find, make sure to inform me quickly about it. In the meanwhile, I'll be at UA informing the principal of what's going on. Aizawa then promptly shut the door after he left, leaving the two alone again. I guess I'll go call my friend now, Yagi said, still slightly blushing. This is quite fascinating indeed. Nezu said in awe. I'm afraid I have never heard of this situation happening before, but I'm happy to study on it further. Do you know where Yagi and Midori are currently? They're at Yagi's apartment contacting someone he knew that could possibly answer some questions for them. Ah yes, I completely forgot about Asami. She's quite the knowledgeable person when it comes to the supernatural. Aizawa looked at Nezu confused. Who is Asami? She is the sister to a sheriff in Tokyo that deals with studying the afterlife. Her real job is a psychiatrist that helps those in extreme emotional turmoil after a death of loved ones. She has a great way of telling grieving patients that their loved ones are in a better place. Aizawa was unsure about how someone could study the afterlife without scientific evidence proving its existence, but after looking at Izuku's ghost for hours, he couldn't exactly call himself a skeptic anymore, could he? Do you think this Asami could give them answers? Oh yes, of course. If anyone could explain Midoriya's presence, it will be her, Nezu said excitedly. 00. When the next morning came, Class 1A was still remaining quiet and angsty as ever since Izuku left them. Bakugo was still barely talking and allowing his anger to keep him going, while the rest of the class continued to grieve together. They knew it was weird to say, but they missed the chaos that Midoriya brought to their class. From the spontaneous villain attacks he would randomly get himself into, to his mysterious quirk developing a new ability they knew nothing about. As they were all sitting at their desks quietly talking, Aizawa walked into the room to begin his lesson. Before he could even set up, Present Mick decided to make a loud entrance by shouting Aizawa's name, startling the whole class. You always have to be obnoxious. Aizawa said in highly irritated tone. This is important, Shouta. Nezu has called for you, so I'm taking over the little listeners until you two discuss your secrets, Mick said in a overly excited but curious tone. Aizawa was neutral as he handed Mick his plans for the lesson and left the room. Mick then looked at the class while they stared back in confusion over why their homeroom teacher left suddenly. Alright listeners, looks like we're starting with English lessons today. Are you ready? Everyone sort of looked at each other shrugging as they prepped for an English lesson. Akumi was sitting at her desk looking over a case she was currently stuck on. She hasn't really been able to sleep much in the last 48 hours due to this particular murder case, but she was coming close to setting up all the evidence to convict her main suspect in court. She never understood why suspects would still claim innocence when all evidence clearly pointed to them. This is one of those faster cases which she was thankful for since she wanted the victim's family to finally get the closure they deserved. As she started to finish up, her desk phone rang. Hello, this is Detective Tenkai. How can I help you? Akumi, it's been quite a while, how are you? Akumi paused trying to recognize the voice on the other end. Sorry, who is this? Oh that's right, this is All Might. I know it's been a long time so I should have known you probably wouldn't recognize my voice. She slightly drew back in surprise. All Might. Wow, it really has been a while. Last I heard from you was before you faced off against that chainsaw villain. Which now makes me wonder, why are you calling out of the blue like this, unless something bad happened again? Oh no, nothing's wrong, but something did happen that I rather not go into too much detail with. I was actually wondering if I was able to get a hold of your sister Asami. I had a few questions for her that I think she would be more well suited to answer, All Might asked. Akumi was again slightly taken aback, wondering why All Might would need her sister's help of all people. Well, I can give you her contact information, but she might be busy. She's been loaded full with patients lately. That's quite alright, this is no emergency. I just have a few odd questions that she may be able to answer when she's free, Yagi assured her. Akumi gave her sister's phone number over, even though she still had questions herself, but she trusted All Might with her life, so she had no reason to be suspect of him. Thank you Akumi, I owe you one. The only thing I want from you All Might is your safety since I know from first-hand experience, you tend to get in trouble easily, Akumi said lightheartedly. She heard a chuckle at the other end. I'll try to keep to that, but until then, I'll talk to you soon. They both said their goodbyes and hung up. Back at Yagi's place, Izuku was curled up on the bed looking at recent hero news on his phone starting to doze off. Yagi smiled as he joined him on the bed pulling him close yet again. I left a voicemail to the girl who could give us some explanations, but it's probably going to be a bit, Yagi said as he kissed the side of Izuku's temple. Izuku smiled up at Toshinori and understanding that's okay, it's not really a rush to talk to her is it? Izuku asked sleepily. Yagi slightly chuckled again. Not at all. I think the only person who wants quick answers is Aizawa and I'm not too worried about his opinion right now he said as he placed more kisses to Izuku's head. The only response Yagi got was a quick before Izuku fell asleep again. He then followed suit after he covered them both with a comforter for a nice midday nap. Asami just finished with her last patient for the day when was finally able to look at her phone. She noticed she had a missed call and voicemail from a number she didn't recognize, but before she could listen to it, her sister Akumi called her. Hey, what's going on? Did you finally finish that murder case you're on? she asked Akumi. We made an arrest a few hours ago, now he's the court's problem. Although, you'll never guess who called me earlier. Who? All Might. Asami's eyes widened in surprise. All Might? I thought he was retired. What did he need from you? She asked confused. Actually I was gonna ask you the same question since he called for your contact info, Akumi said curiously. Asami looked at her phone again. Oh, so that's who called me. I have a voicemail from a number I've never seen before, so it was probably him. Probably, but if you haven't looked at it yet, you can call me back and give me the rundown later. I'm too tired to stay here a second longer, Akumi said exhaustedly. You need to sleep more often anyway, it's not healthy, but yes, I'll call you later when I see what this is all about. As they said their goodbyes, Asami quickly opened the voicemail and listened. Hey Asumi, this is All Might. I know we haven't talked much before, but your sister has told me that you're knowledgeable about the supernatural and other afterlife-related subjects. I was just wondering if you could answer a few questions I had whenever you got the chance to. I would greatly appreciate it, thank you. The voicemail ended, which made Asumi confused more than ever. Why would All Might of all people need to ask questions about the supernatural? Whatever the reason is, she would love to answer his question. I mean, she was a huge fan of his. When Yagi woke up, he felt well rested as he thought he would. He learned that if Izuku was in his hold when he slept, he would sleep without waking up a dozen times in an hour. Yagi still had his eyes closed as he slowly rubbed Izuku's head to wake him up from their 2-hour nap. As he shifted himself a bit to remove his blanket, he noticed something weird. Did Izuku feel smaller than usual, or was he losing his mind? When he opened his eyes, he looked down at Izuku just to learn it wasn't Izuku who got smaller, but he was bigger. He was in his All Might form without even realizing it, or trying for that matter. He sat there in shock for a minute before he felt Izuku shift, signifying he was waking up. When Izuku opened his eyes, he looked around a second before his gaze landed on his dad. It took a second to register that he was in his muscle form before he shot up in shock. How are you doing that? Izuku asked, flabbergasted. I don't know, but this isn't the first time I felt one for all return recently. Although, when it did the first time, it only happened for a second and it didn't feel like this. Yagi said in confusion and curiosity as he looked down at himself. After a few more minutes in his muscle form, smoke began to whirl around him as he deflated back down to his normal state. Both of them looked at each other confused, while Izuku sent feelings of worry, knowing that Yagi was always negatively affected from being in his muscle form for too long. Yagi was also expecting to cough up his lung along with a gallon of blood, but nothing came. He actually felt just fine, as if he had no injury at all. Yagi was used to waking up in some sort of pain, but ever since Izuku has been around, he's been feeling normal. Great even. Are you okay? Izuku asked, waiting for his dad to start coughing blood. Yagi waited another few seconds while stretching a bit. I feel fine. Better than normal actually. I don't know how this is even possible, Yagi said in amazement. Izuku was still slightly suspicious, but he felt no indication of pain through their connection. This was truly amazing. Maybe One for All did go back to his dad, which he has no problem with. If he could use it again, even if it was only for his own personal safety, he would be ecstatic for him. Wait, can you try activating it again to see if you can use it at will? I can try, but I don't know if I'll be lucky a third time, Yagi said uncertain. He then focused on bringing up the old familiar feeling of using One for All, which created promising results. Yagi was able to shift back into his muscle form once more and keep it without feeling stained like he thought he would. Wow, that's amazing. I wonder if you can use your full strength again too, Izuku said excitedly. I'm not too sure, but shall we go test the theory at the beach, Yagi said in his old All Might enthusiasm. Izuku was nearly bursting at the seams in excitement and happiness at seeing his childhood hero back to his former glory. Let's go. Aizawa was getting annoyed again from the silence he was getting from All Might, even though he told him to update as much as possible. He swears if this is just Yagi being greedy and refusing to share Midoriya, he was going to let everyone in on their little secret. Just as he was about to call Yagi again, his phone lit up with the name he was just about to call. It's about time, Yagi. I was beginning to wonder if I had to break into your apartment again, he said with clear annoyance. Oh no, this isn't All Might, but he said he was sorry that he forgot to call you back from earlier. Aizawa knew why Yagi told the problem child to answer the phone, and it was a good tactic. He doesn't think he could ever yell at the kid again. Midoriya, give the phone to All Might. He's not going to use you as his own personal shield to get out of trouble, he said, getting further irritated at Yagi. Well, I would, but he's currently testing out his quirk again. He was gonna ask you if you wanted to meet us at the beach so you could see it for yourself. Aizawa was again taken by surprise at the mention of Yagi's quirk coming back, but with how weird everything is, he's beginning to get used to the bizarre. I'll be there in about 15 minutes, just make sure he doesn't run before I get there. I have a few choice words for him for going silent again. Izuku promised he would keep All Might there as he said goodbye. Aizawa began thinking of how it's possible for All Might to get his quirk restored, but he deemed it pointless since he's never heard of anything like this other than in fictional stories. He just hopes this won't go south. 0. All Might threw another strong punch towards the sea, resulting in a massive wave that showed the bottom. He wasn't going to lie when he said he missed this. Don't get him wrong, he wanted Izuku to have One for All permanently after he transferred it to him, but now that it seems to have returned to him, he refused to let it go again. He will never want anyone else but his son to have the power of One for All. He knew it sounded selfish, but there will only be one successor in his eyes, and he no longer has a physical body to wield this quirk. Shaking his depressing thoughts away, he tried for another powerful hit, only to be disrupted by Izuku getting up and running towards a certain underground hero. "Hi Mr. Aizawa." Izuku yelled as he ran up to him in excitement. "Hey Kai." Aizawa tried to greet him, but Izuku slammed into his chest for a hug before he could finish. Aizawa shook his head, but he couldn't resist returning the affection. Thank God Mick and Midnight weren't here, he would never hear the end of it. "Hello Aizawa, how has it been at UA?" Yagi asked in his loud All Might voice, trying to mask his slight fear towards the man. Aizawa didn't respond as Izuku pulled away, smiling up at him. He glared daggers at Yagi before he turned his focus back towards his problem child. "How are you feeling, kid? Any weird pains or odd feelings again?" Izuku shook his head. "Nope, nothing out of the ordinary. It's weird though, it's hard to explain, but I feel just how I did when I was alive. The only difference of course is not needing to eat and stuff," Izuku explained. Aizawa nodded and looked at Yagi again. "If everything is fine, then there shouldn't have been a reason why you couldn't give me a quick text saying that," he said in a strict voice. "Ah, yes, I suppose we've been neglecting our communication skills of late, but with this new discovery of my quirk coming back, we've been a bit busy," Yagi said with escalating nervousness. Aizawa narrowed his eyes further. "All more the reason to tell me about these new discoveries, especially if it starts to affect him," he said, pointing to Izuku. Izuku felt how nervous his dad was getting, causing him to interrupt. He knew why Mr. Aizawa was upset, but he also knew his teacher wouldn't be as mad if he explained it instead. "We're sorry sensei, we just got a bit distracted over all of this, we should have called you as soon as All Might woke up like this," Izuku said, trying to calm the situation. "You woke up in this state?" Aizawa said with suspicions. "Yes, much to our surprise. It seems I'm able to use it like I did before I transferred it to Izuku. I think after Izuku passed on, One for All returned to me to continue on. Maybe the past users think One for All's purpose isn't done yet," Yagi said in thought. "Have you been feeling pain or coughing up an alarming amount of blood like you used to as well?" Aizawa asked with slight concern. "That's another thing, I've had no side effects at all. It's like my injury isn't even there." Aizawa sighed in exhaustion with even more questions running through his head of how this is happening. 0. Another day for Asumi finished as she heard a quiet knock on the door. She called for them to enter and saw someone she has been wanting to meet for a very long time. "All Might, it's an honor to meet the legendary hero," she said calmly, trying to contain her inner screaming fangirl. "Heh, I don't consider myself that, but thank you regardless. Although, I heard you're a legend yourself when it comes to knowing about the supernatural," Yagi said humbly. Asumi pushed her internal freakout to a reasonable level and smiled. "I've studied subjects related to the afterlife for decades, but I never display my knowledge other than to close friends and family. Which takes me to my next question, what has gotten you so interested in the supernatural anyway, if I may ask?" "Well, in recent events, I've had someone close to me die in a violent way," Yagi said in a low saddened voice. He knows Izuku is with him practically all day every day, but he was still hurt deeply that his son would never grow into the man he always dreamt of him being. Asumi knew all too well how to deal with grieving families, and she immediately went into therapist mode. "All Might, I know how difficult it is to lose someone," but before she could finish, Yagi cut in. "He was my son," he said in slight anger. "He was murdered by his own biological father in the woods along with his mother. And before you say that forgiveness is the first step in getting closure, no one could ever convince me to forgive that monster." Asumi looked on in sympathy, but he was not a patient and had no right to treat him like one. "Okay, that's your choice, but I meant to say that reaching for your son in the afterlife wouldn't be possible. I've had many clients in the past try this only for them to invite horrible entities into their homes," she told him with caution. She was unaware that All Might had an adopted son, but she knew that being the #1 hero was dangerous and understood why he would keep family members under wraps. Yagi decided to speak up once more. "The situation is different, I promise you. My son's spirit never left after his sudden end, which I read is normal if someone dies in a horrible way." Asumi looked at him skeptical since she's heard this story before. Some families believe their loved ones haunt their home, but most of the time it was their minds playing tricks, wanting to believe the deceased was still there. "Why do you think his spirit is still around?" Yagi then chuckled before shouting out, "Izuku, you can show yourself now." Asumi looked at him in confusion before the room began to drop in temperature and the lights began to flicker. She looked around in shock before she saw almost a mist-like figure behind All Might solidify into a teenage boy who looked at her with slightly unsure eyes. Asumi looked on, paralyzed, not really knowing what to do until All Might spoke up again. "Like I said, this situation is different. I was just wanting to know how it's possible, if you had any idea." There was silence as Asumi stared wide-eyed at Izuku, who was blushing at her gaze, trying to hide behind All Might the best he could. Asumi snapped out of her trance as her mind began to race with an explanation of how this was happening. Never in all of her years has she seen something like this, but she was not going to pass up this opportunity to study it further. "Oh, okay, well, this is definitely new to me, but I'm willing to help by looking into it further," she said in amazement. She looked at Izuku once more before she called him forward, asking to take a closer look. When Izuku shyly stepped in front of her, she immediately touched his shoulder, wanting to know if he was solid or not. Amazingly, he felt as if he was alive. There was body heat, he looked and felt solid, there was no translucency, and she didn't feel off like she's experienced before around other spirits. Is there any other symptoms than him being able to look and feel alive? Yes, actually, but it also involves some symptoms on my end too, Yagi said factually. She looked at him curiously. What type of symptoms? Well, as everyone knows, my quirk has been gone since my retirement, but ever since Izuku passed, it's returned. Asumi looked at him in more surprise, but allowed him to continue. We also gained the ability to sort of talk to each other without saying any words, and we can feel each other's emotions. I also have this weird pulling sensation in my stomach if I get too far from All Might, and I lose my solidity too, Izuku cut in, trying to be as descriptive as possible. Asumi took in all of the information and started thinking if she read anything about this. Not getting anything from the top of her head, she wrote down everything they told her and put it to the side. "Okay, I'll be honest, I've never heard of anything like this before, but if you allow me some time, I'll research what I can." All Might and Izuku assured her that she could take her time, knowing how bizarre this was. Yagi gave his phone number again just in case and thanked her before leaving. She sat back down trying to process what just happened before taking herself out of her shock and starting her research. Nezu was a smart creature to say the least. He knew what actions people were going to take even before they did and had amazing instincts that kept him alive even in the deadliest situations. The one thing he didn't know was how he was looking at his dead student as if he were alive. All Might and Izuku were looking at Nezu, expecting a million questions he would undoubtedly ask, but before he did, Nezu decided to call for a staff meeting over the school intercom. This took them both by surprise, since they thought the principal would want to keep this under wraps, but they were proven wrong as they heard the announcement. "Are you sure about this, Principal Nezu? The others might not take this as well as Izawa and Yagi said with skepticism. "Nonsense. The other teachers and students will be ecstatic by Midoriya's return," Nezu said with his usual enthusiasm. Izuku widened his eyes. "Wait, you're planning on telling the whole school? I thought you just said the teachers would be involved in this," he said frantically. "Of course I would like to involve the other students, I thought you would like to see your friends again," Nezu returned with curiosity. Izuku did want to see his friends again, but he still had no idea on what to say. He heard from Izawa how badly they took his death, and his reappearance would definitely bring a shock to say the least. He looked over at his dad with uncertainty, but was only met with Yagi looked towards the ground with an unreadable expression. "Relax, Yagi, if Nezu believes it's the right time for this, then we should do it. You two can't stay trapped in that apartment forever, you know," Izawa said as he walked through the door. Izuku continued to look at his dad with concern, noticing the silence he was giving off, but restrained himself from asking what's wrong. If his dad didn't want to talk right now, then he'll wait till they're alone to ask. Yagi continued to stay silent with a neutral look on his face as Nezu led them to the conference room. As everyone slowly trickled in, they all looked at All Might with surprise and concern while he stayed quiet. "Welcome everyone, it's been a while since we've all been together like this. As we all know, Izuku Midoriya has been a sad topic for all of us to talk about, but I promise this time will be different. All Might has been keeping this secret for a few weeks for personal reasons, but we believe it the right time to tell the rest of you why we'd stayed silent." Nezu looked over at Toshinori, giving him a nod, but Yagi still remained silent with a neutral face. Izawa then gave a frustrated sigh and decided to intervene. "Kid, you can show yourself now." While everyone looked at them oddly at first, their expressions soon grew to pure shock as Izuku himself appeared in front of their eyes from thin air. Everyone remained silent before President Mick decided to break it. "How is this possible? I saw his body. He was dead." Izuku wasn't mentally in the room as the rest of the teachers started to ask questions. All of his attention was on his dad, who was gradually becoming more and more angry as the room got louder. Before he could ask what's wrong, Yagi grabbed his arm and practically dragged him out of the room, slamming the door behind him. 00000000000000000000000. Yagi was livid beyond belief. Why was it so hard for Nezu to communicate with him about subjects that related to his own son? Not to mention Izawa having the audacity to say it was Nezu's decision to tell everyone about Izuku and not him. He gave no permission for this happen yet, and judging by his son's reaction, they didn't ask his permission either. Wait dad, can we stop for a second, Izuku said as he was fumbling to keep up with his dad's large strides. Yagi came to a stop, quickly apologizing to Izuku with worry. I'm sorry son, did I hurt you? Yagi said, checking him with sending guilt through their bond. Izuku quickly reassured him, no, not at all, but what happened back there? I thought you said you wanted to tell the school. Ashinori quickly became angry again. I said the teachers, not the whole school. They had no right to take away our privacy like that and just decide it was the right time because they felt like it, he said with more anger lacing his voice. Izuku didn't really know why his dad was so upset over all this, but something else told him he did. Without thinking, he blurted out his next words with sincerity. Just so you know, I won't leave you behind after everyone knows I'm here. I may want to talk them for a bit for obvious reasons, but I don't have any plans on staying unless you do. I love my friends a lot, especially after everything we've been through, but I realized a while ago that the whole reason that I'm still here is to stay by your side until the end. Yagi stayed quiet for a few seconds to process what Izuku just told him. I know I'm being selfish in all this, but my fear in losing you again is something I can't get rid of. It's beyond frustrating being controlled by it, but you have to understand, I can't live without you now. If you were to move on to the next life from finding your peace with the living, I will without a doubt follow right after you, Yagi said through his tears. Izuku held back his own tears, but refused to allow his dad to feel scared about him leaving. He didn't care if it took all day and night, he would convince him that he will never leave no matter what happened. He slowly walked up to his dad and wrapped his arms around his midsection. One promise, I'll never move on until you do, because I also fear leaving you behind. I wouldn't be truly at peace until you were too. I used to have insecurities about what you thought about me before all this, but now I can freely tell you that I will love you forever no matter what. Izuku couldn't hold his tears throughout his confessions, but for once, he wasn't the only one crying. He felt bad that he made his dad cry, but he knew they were happy tears. Yagi was always a coward when it came to speaking his heart, but this moment was an exception. He wasn't exactly in his best emotional state right now, but he found the words he wanted to say none of the less. I love you so much that it hurt some days. I never understood how I survived before I met you, but now that you're here with me even after your death, don't expect me to let you go anytime soon, Yagi said as he slightly chuckled through his tears. Izuku buried his face in his dad's chest, matching his tearful chuckle, but he felt the same happiness from the words he was told. Yagi decided after a few more minutes of tears and hugging that it was time to pull away and calm his son down before they were discovered. They were in a secluded area of UA right now, but Nezu was smart and would probably predict that they were here eventually. As they both wiped away their remaining tears, they began to laugh from that unplanned dramatic moment. You know, I never used to be a crybaby until you came around, Yagi said, running his fingers through Izuku's hair, continuing to laugh. Hey, it isn't my fault that you decided to storm out with me in front of everyone and then freak out because you thought I was gonna disappear out of the blue, Izuku said lightheartedly. Yagi looked at him pretending to be offended. Oh, I'm sorry, I thought I was saving the both of us from being looked at like we weren't real. Izuku continued the banter by saying something that he kind of wanted to know the truth of. You were probably just mad that Izawa was right and you mostly angry because you didn't want to share me yet, he said, crossing his arms, turning his back to him. Yagi went silent, which made Izuku nervous, thinking he went too far, but before he could turn around to apologize, he was tackled to the ground. He suddenly felt fingers make their way to his ribs, causing him to squeal and laugh from the ticklish sensation. Wait dahahids tahahap, he said, laughing as he curled up trying to protect himself. This is what you get for saying Izawa's right, so I suggest taking it back, Yagi said as he continued. It's true, Izuku shot back, failing miserably at pushing his attacker away. Yagi shook his head in amusement as he continued his assault, watching his son try to get away. He knew Izuku was a teenager, but he was as adorable as a 5-year-old with that baby face of his. What he wouldn't give for Izuku to be his by blood. Don't get him wrong, he loved Izuku regardless of relations, but he would have given up anything to experience raising him from his first day of life. After a few more minutes of torturing him, he pulled away and allowed Izuku to catch his breath for a moment. You're mean for that, Izuku said through small laughs. Yagi chuckled as sat down in the grass, pulling Izuku into his lap, giving a quick kiss to his temple. I see it as punishment for siding with Izawa, he said with fondness as he put Izuku's head under his chin. Izuku huffed in fake annoyance as he curled further into his dad's embrace. Add that to the list of facts you're mad at, he teased. Yagi chuckled again, you'll always be mine. Asumi was still in awe over this whole ghost thing she's been researching. In all of her years studying the paranormal, she never thought it was possible for a spirit to maintain a physical form and mimic the effects of being alive. She's been trying to find answers for All Might and his supposed dead son, but everything she has found so far has been either theories or something out of fictional storybooks. She hopes that her answers are satisfactory for the both of them, but she's not really too sure herself if she's correct about all this. Researching this phenomenon took way longer than she thought, but after exhausting all of her resources in the matter, she thinks she can finally give some sort explanation to All Might. As she read over her notes once more, she picked up her phone to inform All Might of her findings only for his phone to go to voicemail. She knew he was a busy man, so she decided to leave a message stating she was ready to talk when he was. Until he responded, she was going to get as much rest as she could to make up for the lack of sleep she'd been getting through her endless research. She loved helping and all, but damn was it tiring work. 00000000000000000000000. Aizawa was currently standing in front of his class that he gathered in the common room with All Might in tow. He knew this was going to be a highly emotional moment when Midoriya showed himself, but he was glad this time wouldn't be as depressing as the last. Alright, I know it's been a while since I've brought up Midoriya, but this time I think it's necessary for all of you to know what's happening. Everyone looked at Aizawa with curiosity, wondering why their dead classmate was being brought up again, but went along with it because this was the first time their teacher even mentioned Midoriya's name since his death. They knew he took it hard just like the rest of them, so they were glad he was healing enough to talk about it again. Before I continue, All Might and I have yet to find answers over how this is happening, but everyone here has the right to know about this secret regardless. Aizawa looked over at All Might silently asking him if he was free to show Midoriya again. He didn't want another repeat of the staff meeting they had earlier. Yagi nodded at him before he decided to explain his actions to the class. I quickly want to apologize for my recent absence as your teacher. Izuku's death was incredibly difficult for me to accept and I was not in the right state of mind to be here. I know you all have been the same, which is why I want to show you how I healed enough to be here now. The students looked at him with more confusion before they heard All Might call out to someone they thought they would never see again. Izuku, you can come out now. Yagi said as he watched his little boy phase into existence in front of him. As he appeared, everyone in the room came to a standstill. Most looked at Izuku as if they were dreaming, while the others already had tears forming in their eyes. Izuku had no clue what to say or do, so he awkwardly said a quick "Hey guys." Uraraka was the first to slam into him for a hug, as others began to do the same one by one, crying audibly. Enya and Shoto staying staring at him, stuck in disbelief over how they were even seeing him, while Bakugo kept his head down. Izuku comforted everyone that were apologizing over how they couldn't save him. He knew everyone held guilt over his death, but he had no intention on letting them keep those thoughts. It's no one's fault that I died the way I did. The only one to blame is my murderous father that thought he had to get rid of me and mom for his own personal gain. Uraraka looked at him with tears pouring down her face. How are you even here? She said in grief and confusion. Izuku put his hand behind his head with a sheepish grin across his face. I'm actually not too sure myself. Mom and I sort of just woke up and came back here for some reason. She moved on to her next life while I stayed here for personal reasons, he said as he looked over at All Might. Everyone stayed emotional while still asking questions he didn't know the answers to until they were all startled by a small explosion. They all looked over at Bakugo as he stormed out of the room, not saying a word. Izuku watched him with worry, knowing how Kaken dealt with his emotions. He knew he would have to talk to him alone to make him feel more comfortable with showing his vulnerability. He would undoubtedly give. Midoriya, are you alive or just here somehow? Shoto decided to cut in. Izuku looked at him with sympathy. No, I'm not alive and I'm still not 100% sure how I'm here. Izuku said with uncertainty. Shoto nodded with a slight sadness on his face, while Aizawa decided to speak up. Now that everyone knows about this, all of you must promise to keep this out of the public eye, which includes other classes. We can't have news like this reaching its way to possible villains who would want to kidnap All Might and Midoriya for their own crude experiments. Wait, why would they want to take All Might? He's not the ghost, Izuku is, Kirishima said, stating the obvious. Like we said earlier, we are still unaware on how all of this is possible, but we do know that Midoriya is tied to All Might in some way. Aizawa informed. They all looked between All Might and Izuku with wide eyes, wondering how they could be linked. It's annoying not to have answers, but they were all just glad to have Izuku back regardless. Yagi looked at the time with surprise and how late it already was and pointed out to Aizawa the clock on the wall. Aizawa nodded before he regained everyone's attention. Alright, it's past curfew, everyone to your dorms for the night, we can continue catching up later. There was a variety of disappointed noises throughout the room before Tenya decided to finally speak up for the first time. Do what he says everyone, we can easily talk again tomorrow after we're all more awake. He said with his robot arms in full display. Everyone was actually happy to oblige seeing their class president finally going back to his old self. He has been awfully quiet ever since Izuku died, and they actually missed his loudness and bossy attitude. Once everyone left back to their dorms after saying goodnight to Izuku, Yagi checked his phone only to see a missed call and a voicemail from the girl he'd been waiting eagerly to hear from. Perfect. Asumi said she thinks she finally has some answers for us and is ready to meet up again when we're ready. He said with excitement. That's great. All these questions are bugging me beyond belief. Izuku said, matching his dad's enthusiasm. Aizawa rolled his eyes at them both before walking towards the door. Inform me about what she says later, so Nezu stops asking me the same unanswerable questions I can't give him. As Aizawa walked out, Yagi shook his head at that poor attempt to hide his care for the same answers. 00000000000000000000000. The next morning, Asumi heard a light knock at her door as she called out to her guests to come in. Toshinori entered with a quick hello as he sat down in front of her desk, eagerly waiting for her to start. She smiled at his obvious excitement and grabbed all of her research papers ready to go over her findings. Alright, before I begin, I'll have to warn you that I can't guarantee that these answers are 100% true. I did the best I could to find similar happenstances like yours in paranormal histories, but I only came across theories that have been studied briefly before by supernatural enthusiasts. Yagi nodded in understanding and gestured for her to continue. Okay, well, I started with how Izuku was able to stay around even after death and came across several sources all saying the same thing. I have heard of multiple cases of spirits lingering around after a violent death because they had unfinished business with the living. Izuku is no different in this case and came back because he wasn't ready to die yet. He wasn't the only one who wasn't ready, Yagi said sadly. I get the part of the whole unfinished business thing since it's common knowledge, but what I don't understand is how he's able to appear like he's alive. Ah yes, that is what stumped me as well. It took me a while to find anything related to it, but I also considered the other side effect of your Quirk's mysterious return and how you described feeling Izuku's presence or emotions all the time. Everything I found were just theories of course, but all still pointed to one possible explanation. Soulmates. Toshinori stopped processing everything after she said that simple word and just stared at her like she was losing her mind. Although, after he considered it for a minute, everything began to make sense. Izuku coming to him right after he died, feeling his presence every time he used One for All, the ability to nearly read his thoughts and feel his emotions. He just never thought soulmates were real, and he always pictured them as two people who were in love romantically, which made him recoil. Asumi knocked him out of his thoughts with a harsh laugh and reassured him soulmates can easily be platonic as well. Smart one. If anything, I read that platonic soulmates are actually more common than the romantic version we all know about. Yagi sighed, trying to comprehend what he's been told before another question arose. Wait, if Izuku is truly my soulmate as you say, could he also be the reason why I don't feel any pain when I used my quirk like I used to? She had yet to hear about this symptom, but she did remember writing down something similar to the topic that she thought was interesting. As she looked through her papers, glazing over her notes for what she needed until she came across what she thought could help. Here we are. Yes, I found a bit of info about how spirits have the ability to heal to an extent, especially if two souls are linked. I can only speculate, but I think the reason why you don't feel pain from your injury anymore is because Izuku is subconsciously supporting your physical weaknesses. Spirits have abilities similar to quirks, going off of how they can do things like turn invisible, phase through physical objects, and even possess someone if they're strong enough. In your case, I think you and Izuku's souls are sort of giving each other feedback in a way. He gives you the ability to use your quirk again while preventing further harm to your body, and your soul allows him to stay in a solid form while also keeping your shared quirk as well. Yagi took in all of this information, almost overwhelmed with how he was probably the only one alive to experience this bond. He could have never predicted when he met Izuku that the timid, lanky, and reckless middle school kid could change his whole life this drastically. He never thought he would ever have kids, let alone a soulmate, but now that he had them both wrapped up into one, he would never part from his son again if he had anything to say about it. Thank you, Asumi, for everything. You didn't have to take the time out of your day to do all this. Nonsense. This was actually really fun and fascinating to look into. I never thought I would ever meet someone with your type of paranormal attachment, let alone the great All Might himself. Asumi said passionately. Yagi chuckled in amusement. You sound like Izuku when I first met him. He was the biggest fanboy and even still gets all excited when I use my muscle form. From one superfan to another, I get it. Asumi said as she looked behind Toshinori. I was wondering if you were gonna show yourself, Yagi said with a smile. Izuku shyly walked in front of Asumi, apologizing for his lack of appearance. Sorry, I was trying to process what you were saying, but now that you've explained it, everything is starting to make more sense. He said with a light blush. Yagi sensed Izuku was feeling a bit unsure and insecure about this new revelation, which caused his amusement to fade a bit. Well, we definitely took up more than enough of your time, but if we have any other weird things happen to us, I'll be sure to call you back. Yagi said with appreciation. Of course, I'll always be happy to help. Until next time, you two. The two of them bowed and left her office quietly and she waved goodbye. When they walked outside, Yagi stopped Izuku before they continued to his truck while feeding worry through his side of the bond. What's wrong? Yagi said, being straightforward, wanting to hear Izuku's honest answer. Izuku looked down, showing even more insecure body language. It's nothing really. I'm just wanting to get back home is all. I'm starting to get a bit tired. He said, trying to lie convincingly. Yagi narrowed his eyes, slightly disappointed that Izuku would lie to him so obviously. Wanna try that answer again without lying, young man? Izuku cringed at the authoritative tone in his dad's voice, but he felt so stupid for feeling the way he did, especially after everything that was said. I'm not lying, I promise. I really am just wanting to go home, Izuku said, trying one more time to get around this inevitable conversation. He looked up at his dad, testing to see if it worked, only to be met with disciplinary eyes glaring back at him. Alright, how about this? If you don't tell me what's bothering you in the next 3 seconds, I will not allow you to go back to UA for a week. Izuku snapped up to look at his dad in slight panic. But that's not fair. I don't always have to tell you everything, he said in slight defiance. You do if it means the stability of your emotional health, Yagi snapped back, not liking this new tone his son tried to take with him. But. 1. Yagi began counting. But I said I was fine. 2. Please dad, it's stupid, trust me. Dhr. Okay. I'll tell you. Izuku said in defeat. Nice of you to see reason. Now what wrong? Izuku gave a huff in annoyance before he began his confession. I was just thinking about this whole soulmate thing and thought you wouldn't want to be tied to me like that. It's bad enough that I can't leave you without disappearing, but now you're forced to stay around me forever even if you don't want to be. Izuku said with tears prickling the back of his eyes. As he continued to wallow in his insecurities, he felt his dad grab his chin and force him to look him in the eye. If you honestly think that I would grow tired of you at some point for some stupid reason, then you don't know me as well as I thought you did. Izuku looked at him with shock and confusion as he continued. I will tell you this 1,000,000 times over and 1,000,000 times again if it means that one day you'll finally get it through that stubborn head of yours. I love you more than anything and anyone else in this world, and I will never grow tired of you, even if we were the only 2 people left in existence. No one in this universe could ever tear me from you, and if they tried, they will figure out how cruel I can be. Tears poured down Izuku's face as his dad pulled him in for a hug, trying to comfort him the best he could. Yagi felt waves of guilt and regret come his way as he shushed his son to calm him down. A few more minutes passed before Izuku was finally able to get his tears under control. Yagi pulled him away, keeping his hands placed on his shoulders. Feeling better now? He asked as he wiped Izuku's tears away. Izuku nodded, sniffling before he asked his next question. Can we go home now? I'm actually getting tired now. He said weakly. Yagi chuckled before pulling him into his side, leading him to his truck. Of course, son. Let's get you to bed. Bakugo was furious. He couldn't believe that nerd would come back as if it was nothing. He wanted to strangle that asshole for causing the pain that he did to everyone and to him. After all the hell they went through from his murder, he had no right to come back and reopen their healing wounds. Bakugo paced back and forth in his room while struggling to fight back tears. He wouldn't cry for that nerd, he wouldn't. He didn't cry this entire time, so why all of a sudden did he feel so out of control? He sat down on the edge of his bed as he lost his battle with his tears. He hated how his damn emotions wouldn't listen to him and why they reacted so much towards that sheep-headed DEKU. He continued to cry until he heard a knock on his door. Go the hell away. He yelled, in no mood to talk to anyone. Kaken. I'm sorry for bothering, but I was wondering if we could talk alone. Izuku said quietly behind the door. Bakugo aggressively wiped his tears away and swung his door open with more anger than normal. What the hell do you want, Casper? Izuku slightly backed up, startled, putting his hands up nervously. Sorry Kaken, but you seemed a bit off and I wanted to check on you. Bakugo growled in anger as he pulled Izuku in by the collar of his shirt and throwing him in his room aggressively. As Bakugo slammed his door shut, he looked at Izuku on the ground, who was backing up in slight fear. Explain how the fuck you're even here. You were dead. The entire world thought you were dead. Izuku slowly stood up while keeping his eyes on Bakugo, worried he would get violent like their middle school days. I just recently found out myself how this is possible, but it's hard to explain. Bakugo gave another growl of frustration. I don't care if it takes you the whole month to explain. Tell me the truth. Izuku sighed in defeat but tried to explain everything the best he could. He went over what happened after him and his mom woke up, how his mom moved on, him and All Might's bond, and what they recently discovered with Asumi. Bakugo didn't say a word the entire time Izuku spoke. He was dumbfounded with this practical fictional story, but at the same time, he somehow believed it. He was talking to Deku's ghost, for crying out loud, so he couldn't not believe it, could he? That's everything I know, Kaken, I promise. If I find out anything new, I tell you so you're not out of the loop. Bakugo remained silent for a few more moments, trying to process what he was told before he finally found his next words. You and All Might are soulmates. What the hell do you take me for, an idiot? He said in a dangerous tone. Izuku backed up a bit more. And no, I'm telling the truth. Asumi told us that was most likely the case going off of her research in our symptoms. Izuku knew how crazy he sounded, but at the same time, he knew deep down that his dad was the whole reason why he was still here. If All Might wasn't here, he knew he would have moved on with his mother without a doubt in his mind. Bakugo was as still as a statue, looking down at the floor with a neutral expression. Izuku was getting more and more nervous with each second of silence. Kaken. Are you okay? He asked with a bit of worry. Get out. Bakugo said quietly. Izuku looked at him with slight shock. Are you Sue? Get out. I need to think. Izuku flinched a bit but left quietly, shutting the door behind him. Bakugo sat back down in thought, with his anger slowly starting to dissipate. He can't believe that nerd had a soul bond with All Might of all people. He knew that this whole shared quirk crap made them close, but he never thought it would go this far. He bet the green-haired bastard relished in the thought of tying his soul to the former #1 hero. He didn't know what was going to happen next, but he knew one thing. He was still going to beat that nerd and become the #1 hero, ghost or not. So how'd that talk go? Yagi asked as Izuku walked down the hallway to the common room. I'm not exactly sure. He was angry like I expected him to be, but I think he's just overwhelmed with it all, just like everyone else, Izuku said with uncertainty. Yagi nodded in understanding. He'll come around eventually, just give him time to adjust to all that information. Izuku nodded back in agreement and thought about what to say the next time he saw Kaken. He was distraught when the common room door opened, revealing Izawa with Nezu in his scarf. Hello you two, I have a question about your next steps regarding UA. Nezu said in his usual cheery voice. Both of them were surprised by Nezu's sudden appearance, but then became confused by his question. Next steps? Yagi asked. Well, if you are staying as a teacher and Izuku as a student, of course. Both of them looked at each other, knowing they haven't even thought about what they wanted when it came to staying at UA. Yagi didn't think it would work since Izuku couldn't stay visible unless they were in close proximity of each other. If Izuku and him needed to be on opposite ends of the campus, there would be no way his son could stay solid for his classes. Did you two not want to stay here then? Nezu asked, sensing their hesitation. Oh no, it's not that. It's just Izuku and me can't exactly be too far apart from each other without him disappearing. My soul is literally keeping him here, and if I'm not there, he can't be there either. Yagi tried to explain. Nezu put his paw on his chin and thought, wondering how they could work around this barrier. You said that Midoriya had to practice staying visible for a while before he could get to this point, correct? Izuku then decided to cut in ya, but it took me a few weeks, and if I start getting too far from All Might, it begins to hurt almost as if I'm being stabbed in the stomach, he described as accurately as he could. Yagi looked over at him with worry, not knowing this information before now. He had a feeling Nezu would still want to continue with the training to extend their invisible rope between them, but he also had no intention on hurting Izuku to do it. Ah, I see, then we should do this process gradually to prevent that feeling. Don't even think about it, Yagi said in low angry tone. You already went behind my back about telling the class about Izuku's reappearance. You will not force him into this stupid training idea that could or could not work. He will not allow his son to go through any more pain than he already had. He was far too young to experience the things he did, and he would not allow anyone else to cause further trauma to his child. No one is suggesting that we put Midoriya through pain-induced training. We are just trying to allow you both to have your old lives back without having to worry about Izuku's physical state, as always said, trying to defuse Yagi's obvious anger. He understood the want to protect Izuku from pain. He will never forget that bloody All Might shirt in the ground and would prefer keeping the problem child away from any type of danger again. It's okay, Dad, really. I do want to continue classes and graduate if I can, even though I can't physically grow up anymore, Izuku said with a bit of sadness. Yagi had to stop himself from letting out a sob at that comment. He hated the monster who stole his baby boy's life like it was nothing. He should have killed that prick when he had the chance. Nezu climbed down from Izawa's shoulder with a frown and walked towards Izuku until Yagi stepped between them, both with steam beginning to rise from him. "Relax Yagi, you know he's not gonna do anything to harm him," Izawa said, trying to get Toshinori to see reason. "I apologize for making you think you are forced to do this training and causing harm to yourself. My mind has a tendency to jump to conclusions sometimes and assumed you would like to at least test the theory. Well, you were right about one thing, I do want to continue with my classes, but I also don't want to be slowly torn from Dad to do it. The whole reason I'm here is to stay with him and I don't want that to change." The room went silent for a minute before Yagi put himself between Izuku and Nezu once more. "You heard him," Yagi said sternly. Nezu bowed and walked back to the front door. "If you change your mind, you know where to find me," Nezu said in a more upbeat tone. Izawa sighed again, getting annoyed over how ridiculous Yagi was being. He knew how overprotective he could get with Midoriya, but he's acting like they're planning to take the problem child away. He looked over at the two while they had another silent conversation, most likely about what happens next. Midoriya looked like he was on the verge of tears again, while Toshinori pulled him into his lap to comfort him. "You don't have to go through any type of training you don't want to, kid. I know what Nezu is asking is a lot, and I get why you would be a bit scared about going outside your comfort zone." Izuku cried silently as he buried his face into Toshinori's neck, mumbling something only Yagi seemed to hear. Whatever he said made Toshinori more agitated with his presence, judging by how he glared daggers at him. Taking that as his signal to leave, he quietly left without saying another word about their previous topic. Once they were alone again, Izuku pulled away while he still had tears going down his face. He didn't know why he was so affected by the thought of training himself to be somewhat normal again, but his whole soul was screaming at him not to do it. He wanted his dad to have the chance to get alone time again, without having to worry about him lurking in the background like a creep. Independence is something everyone should be allowed to have, but his stupid brain told him that his dad would remember how great it was to be alone again and choose to send him away permanently. He knew he was being ridiculous, but his fear of being abandoned told him otherwise. "Enough, son," Yagi said, knowing exactly what he was thinking. "Do I have to go through another speech telling you why I will never grow tired of you?" Izuku blushed as he shook his head, forgetting how easily his dad read his mind. "I was just thinking about the positives of training myself so you don't have to be around me all the time. I'm pretty sure you miss having time to yourself without needing to worry about me disturbing you." Yagi sighed, knowing how timid and insecure Izuku could get when it came to expressing his feelings. He then took Izuku's forehead and brought it to his own, holding it there for a second before he said his next words. "Clearly you still don't get how much I want you with me, so I will tell you this with complete honesty. I will support you with any choice you make, but know that I have no care for this so-called training that will teach you how to be farther from me. I don't like how Nezu and Izawa are interfering with us as much as they are, and I especially don't like how this training would cause you pain. It seems they don't understand the extent I will go to keep you from further harm, but I'm about to show them what happens when they try to separate me from you," Yagi said with anger and determination. Izuku buried himself into his dad, once more worried about what he would do if Izawa or Principal Nezu brought up this option again. He knew that his dad wasn't bluffing on what he would do if they pressured him into this choice, and he didn't want his dad to start a fight and get in trouble from it. "If they ask again I'll tell them no," Izuku said in reassurance. Yagi furrowed his eyebrows. "Don't say no, just because of me, son. If you want to do this, then don't allow me to stop you." Izuku shook his head. "No, it's not because of you, it's just my mind telling me that it's not a good idea. I think if I strayed too far from you, it would cause problems for you too. I don't know if that's true, but something is telling me otherwise," Izuku said, not really understanding why he thought this. Toshinori didn't want to test the theory if Izuku was right or not, which only made him more certain of his decision to keep him away from Nezu's training. He was also glad that Izuku was seeing the possible negatives in what could happen if the training went too far. He didn't want Izuku to be ripped from him again from some stupid training accident. He would end the world before he let that happen. "Okay, then we won't go through with it and get you through schooling another way. Nezu and Izawa can get over it." Izuku agreed and got up so his dad could stand up off the couch. They left the common room to go back home until Yagi's phone rang with a familiar name popping up on the screen. He stopped in his tracks with slight fear on his features as he contemplated whether to answer it or not. After a few more rings, he reluctantly answered the call with a shaky hello, only to have yelling on the other end. Yagi cringed as he pulled the phone away from his ear while trying to calm the other person down. Wait, I can explain everything, I promise, just give me a second." Izuku looked at him with confusion on who was calling until the voice became loud enough to recognize. "Gran Torino. I forgot about him," Izuku said, feeling a bit stupid for forgetting the man who taught him how to control One for All. The light, hold on, how about I go see you in person tomorrow and I'll tell you about everything that happened, Yagi said nervously. There was more yelling on the other end and the call abruptly ended while Yagi slumped in defeat. Izuku looked at him curiously, wondering what Gran Torino said. Well, it looks like we have another stop to make. Torino isn't too happy about discovering the news about your death through an old newspaper here, Ed. Izuku became even more confused, but that makes no sense, I died almost 2 months ago and he's just hearing about it now. Yagi nodded with a slight chuckle. Yeah, Torino was never one to keep up with the news unless I told him about it back in the day. He always said he had no interest in news that didn't affect him directly. Izuku knew Gran Torino was old and didn't care about internet or technology in general, but in cases like these, he would think Torino would want to be more informed by using news sources that wasn't old newspapers. So we're going to his house then? Izuku asked. Yagi sighed nervously but nodded. It seems so. He apparently doesn't want to wait another day to hear the full story. He also wants to see me for himself to make sure I'm not being stupid, as he said. Izuku laughed lightly. At least he still cares for you enough to check in. I just don't know how he'll react to me still being here. Yagi slightly cringed at that, wondering how he was going to break to news without having him blow up on him for not saying anything. Just prepare to be yelled at and try to dodge his cane the best you can, Yagi said as they walked to his truck. This was going to be a long day. Toshinori's legs were shaking as he walked up to the front door of his sensei's home. He was an idiot for not communicating with him after everything happened, but at the same time, he was in no mood to talk to anyone after Izuku died. Of course he should have called when Izuku came back, but what was he supposed to say? Oh yeah, I forgot to tell you Izuku died, but it's okay though because his ghost is still around. He would sound like crazy person that couldn't handle the grief he was going through. I mean, it wouldn't be completely wrong since he was wishing for death that entire time, but he promises he's not that way anymore. Before he could knock, the door swung open and he was hit in the kneecap by that dreaded cane he feared so much. When were you going to tell me about all this, huh? Am I chopped liver to you now, is that it? Yagi grabbed his knee in pain, and before Torino could even think about striking Yagi again, the cane flew so far from his grasp that it landed on the other side of the street. Torino looked down at his hand and then back at the cane in a bewilderment, not knowing what the hell just happened. He didn't have any more time to react before he was tossed like his cane across his kitchen against his cupboards. He groaned as he rubbed the back of his head, looking around frantically to defend himself from his unknown attacker. Wait, son. He has a right to be upset over all this, just relax, you don't need to protect me from him, Yagi said, trying to stop Izuku's attack from getting worse. Torino looked wide-eyed at Yagi as he watched him call out to nothing but empty space. He knew Tashi was a busy man, so his lack of communication didn't spark him as weird, but he never would have guessed that his silence was from the death of the kid he trained himself. It was a real shame the boy's life was cut so short, especially after the potential he shown during his week here. The loss of a child is devastating to everyone who knows them, which is why he wanted to see how Toshinori's coping. Going off of how he's shouting at nothing, he's clearly losing his mind. Toshinori ran up to Torino, offering a hand to lift him up off the floor. Torino got up without taking the hand and glared at Yagi, trying to read his emotional state. From what he could tell, Yagi seemed fine, but he knows he's an expert at hiding his real emotion with that signature smile of his. Before he got to questioning him, he looked around the room again, still wondering what that invisible force was. I'm sorry about all that, he can be a bit defensive when it comes to my safety, Yagi said, referencing this unknown force again. That attack was your doing? When did you gain that ability? Torino asked with irritation. Oh, no, that wasn't me, that was Izuku. As soon as Yagi said that, Izuku took that as his signal to appear in front of Gran Torino, with clear anger on his face. Why do you have to use violence just because you're upset? Dad doesn't deserve to be hit just because he forgot to tell you about all this. Besides, if you really cared about him, you would have kept in touch more often, other than calling every few months when you feel like it. Izuku did not like people who physically lashed out at others due to their anger. He dealt with bullies for years and would protect others from them if he could, especially his dad. Torino looked at Izuku, not fully comprehending what was going on. The news said this kid was dead, how in the hell was he in front of him? As Torino was processing what he was seeing, Yagi bent down to Izuku's level as he sent feelings of gratitude his way. Hey, I appreciate you trying to protect me, but there is no need for that. Gran Torino is an old friend that just happens to be a little aggressive with his feelings. You should also be kind to him, especially after everything he taught you, Yagi said with a bit of sternness. Izuku furrowed his eyebrows, still irritated. He still shouldn't hit so much, Kakin is my friend too, but I never liked him hitting me when he did. Yagi sighed as he brought his hand up to Izuku's head to run it through his hair to calm him. He had learned a while back that Izuku relaxed quite a bit when you played with his hair. He had a feeling his mother did it to him when he was little to coax him to sleep, and damn did it work well. I know your past wasn't easy, son, and I don't want you think you have to save me from our friends because of it. I promise the only time I'll need your physical strength is to hold me back from some idiot trying to hurt you," Yagi said lightheartedly. Izuku chuckled a bit and nodded, then turned to Torino, who was watching them both with an unreadable expression. Both of them stood there awkwardly, not really knowing what to say next. Torino then walked past them to a cup on the table and drank its contents while he sat down on the nearby chair. "Explain everything." It was twilight out before they were done talking about Izuku's murder and new ghostly look. Torino was still not fully comprehending all the details, but he was at least informed of this bizarre circumstance. "You two truly believe this whole soulmate thing?" Torino asked, still skeptical about it all. "Of course," Yagi said with certainty. "With all that has happened and what is currently happening, I have no doubt in my mind that he's my other half." Torino facepalmed from how mentally exhausted he was from all this new information. He couldn't believe that this kid he trained to use one for all was already dead and somehow a ghost that could look alive. He also never thought Tashi would ever be able to use his quirk again without causing further harm to his body. He still didn't get how Izuku was able to support Tashi physically through some invisible spiritual bond between them, but he wasn't even going to try to question it. "I want to apologize again for not telling you earlier about all this, but before Izuku came back, I honestly had no will to talk to anyone for the rest of my life." Torino knew he wasn't lying, knowing how much he cared for the boy, but he never would have suspected they were this close. "I will just stress on you to keep me updated, and I will call more often too, just to make sure nothing else life-changing happens without my knowledge." He looked at Izuku with an apologetic expression. "I'm sorry you died as young as you did. Your father was a monster to do what he did to you and your mother, and I hope he gets what's coming to him while he's in prison." Izuku nodded silently in thanks and looked at Yagi, almost as if was asking for something. Toshinori apparently knew what it was because they both stood up looking ready to leave. "It was nice catching up, sensei, but we really should be going. I'm pretty sure you're tired too from all that talking." Torino believed that to be an understatement as he stood up to see them off. The father and son duo were quick to get into their truck so they could go home and rest. It was nice seeing Torino again, but they were there all day and were not expecting to visit him originally. They waved goodbye as they drove off while Yagi looked over at Izuku, noticing how tired he really was. He smiled fondly before he used his other arm to pull Izuku's head down onto his lap. Izuku was a bit startled for a second, but readily accepted it once he realized what was happening. Izuku stayed on his dad's lap the entire way back without saying a word. He was becoming more comfortable with accepting physical affection and actually craved it more when he was tired like he was. As they sleepily walked through the door of their home, Toshinori told him to get into his pajamas for the night and meet him in bed when he was ready. Izuku was more than happy to do so, going by how loopy he was getting from the lack of sleep. After he half-consciously got undressed for the night, he got into bed waiting for his dad to join him. He closed his eyes, already on the verge of sleep, until he felt the mattress dip and arms wrap around him. Izuku instantly burrowed himself into Yagi's chest, while Yagi rubbed his back slowly to encourage sleep. Izuku was not all there when Yagi shifted to turn off the light, but in his near-unconscious state, he latched onto Yagi's shirt, thinking he was getting up again, which made him slightly panic for some reason. He gave off a small whimper and quietly said a word that he knew he would get embarrassed about in the morning if he remembered it. "Daddy?" he said with pure emotion that made Yagi stop altogether. Toshinori began to see Izuku as his child pretty early on in their relationship. While he trained him to take on one for all on that beach, he began to get more and more attached each day. He truly knew he was done for when Izuku told him he accepted him no matter which form he came in. He hated the fact that he wasn't there in his early years to watch him grow up and replace that piece of shit that called him son. Hearing Izuku call him the childhood version of what he calls him now was overwhelming. He felt tears prickle the back of his eyes as he wrapped his whole body around his son to reassure him that he was safe. Izuku whimpered quietly one more time before Yagi kissed his forehead, saying his own endearing words he wished to call his son in his younger years. "It's alright, baby boy, I will never leave you," he said with a few tears escaping into his pillow. Izuku quieted down after that and was out like a light. Yagi continued to do comforting gestures until his tears stopped and he followed Izuku into sleep. 0. In an abandoned building across the city, a man with a black bag was waiting impatiently for his guest to arrive. He knew this was his last shot to gain the trust of his boss back, especially after his little mishap with that damn hero. The contents of this bag is a rare specimen that his boss could easily use once it hatches. He just hopes it's not a dud. "This better be worth my time, Buzzard, you have disappointed me far too many times to me to go easy on you again." Buzzard was a villain similar to Hawks in the way he had wings, but he was not lucky enough to be able to control his feathers, and they were not a bright flashy red. He has dark gray wings along with the legs and feet similar to a buzzard bird. "You will not be disappointed this time around, sir, I promise it," he said nervously. His boss raised an eyebrow as he pulled out a large black egg about the size of a human head. He held it out to his boss as he took it in his hands and examined its patterns that showed faintly on its ridged surface. "Would you like to tell me what I'm looking at?" the mysterious man asked, obviously not impressed. Buzzard was surprised his boss didn't know what it was since he's been seeking out one of these creatures for a while, but he was still quick to tell him. "This is a dragon egg, sir. I stole it from a nest up in the high mountains of China," he said with a smirk. His boss looked at him with skepticism, then back at the egg, examining it once more. After he realized Buzzard was telling the truth, he smiled evilly. "It seems you made yourself useful for once. I have several ideas on how I can use this." Buzzard breathed a sigh of relief knowing he wasn't about to be tortured and cast out. He hoped his boss would remember his usefulness every time he rode that beast into battle. He knew a lot of people would die by fire after it was big enough for his boss to use properly, he just prayed he wasn't going to be one of those victims. Izuku woke up feeling as if he hasn't slept at all. He felt groggy and completely lax to the point he could barely move. It took him a second to process how little he could move his limbs and started to panic a bit once his mind reminded him of how he was murdered in the first place. He tried to move again to see if his dad was around him, but he only felt an empty bed. He was glad he was still at home, but he panicked a bit more now thinking his dad was in trouble. He sent a signal of worry and fear towards All Might, hoping he would get a response, and thankfully it did. He heard fast footsteps coming down the hallway and swinging the door open, only to show Toshinori in high alert looking around the room for threats. "What's wrong, son? Are you hurt?" Yagi asked in a stressed voice. Izuku shook his head weakly. "No, but something's wrong. I can barely move and I feel funny like I did when I was drugged by Hisashi." Yagi's eyes widened with more worry as he looked over Izuku's body searching for anything weird, but found nothing. He didn't know much about how ghosts worked, so he had no clue on how to even start finding a solution for this. He started to pace a bit wondering what he could do until he finally remembered the only person who could possibly help. He pulled out his phone, quickly bringing up his contact list for the number he desperately needed right now and hit the call button. It rang a few times and he wondered if she was even going to answer until he finally heard a hello. "Asumi. Something's wrong with Izuku. He says he can't move and he looks almost drugged or drunk and I have no idea what could be causing it," he said in a panic. "Whoa, okay, slow down, what's going on?" Asumi said, completely blindsided by this sudden emergency call. Yagi went on to explain more of Izuku's issues after a few moments of trying to calm himself down. He grew angry at himself for not looking into the lore of ghosts all this time, but he couldn't dwell on it now, Izuku needed his help. He then heard Asumi move some papers around which he assumed was her research files that she showed them before. After a few more minutes of silence and impatience on his end, Asumi gave an aha, clearly finding what she was looking for. "Okay, have you been using your quirk a lot in the last few days?" Asumi questioned. "No, not at all. I barely used it in the last few weeks, let alone days," Yagi said with urgency. Asumi hummed in response and looked back at her notes for a minute before asking her next question. "I know this is going to sound strange, but would you happen to burning anything with sage in it?" Yagi definitely considered that an odd question, but what was even stranger is that he was currently burning some sage incense sticks that were given to him from one of his friends after Izuku passed. She was one of the officers that worked at the crime scene of Izuku's murder and was also another person who knew about their bond. She said burning the incense would help with clearing the negative energy in the air and possibly improve his mood. He never burned them before now, but he found the sage-laced sticks in the drawer this morning and decided to give them a shot. Actually yes. I'm currently burning some incense sticks that is sage embedded in them, but what does that got to do with anything?" Yagi asked, confused. Asumi facepalmed in All Might's lack of spiritual knowledge, but she was glad to teach him the basics at the very least. "Well, that's your problem. Sage is a herbal medicine that is also used to get rid of unwanted spirits in a home. Izuku is probably weakened from it because it's lingering in the air. If you get rid of those, it should help him get back to normal." Yagi sharply inhaled and immediately ran to the living room where the sticks were and threw them in the sink. He turned the faucet on to put out the burning embers while he ran to all of his windows, propping them open. He lastly turned on all of his ceiling fans to push out the toxic air faster out the windows. Once he was sure that was all he could do, he finally responded to Asumi's calls asking if he was still there. Okay, I got rid of it all," Yagi said, slightly winded. "Good, Izuku should start feeling better now, but call back if he's still weakened," Asumi said reassuringly. Yagi thanked her as they both hung up, then went back to check on Izuku, only to find him trying to sit up on his own. "Whoa there, take it easy," Yagi said, helping Izuku prop himself up against the wall behind the bed. I'm okay, just a little weak is all," he said with a slight slur. Yagi clenched his teeth, feeling like crap about not knowing that Sage did this to his son. He really needed to get his hands on all of those notes from Asumi so he doesn't repeat something like this in the future. His guilt must have been strong because Izuku quickly cut in to reassure him. "You didn't know, Dad, there is no reason to blame yourself. I honestly didn't know Sage did that to me either, which is something else I need to remember about myself." His son was always so forgiving towards everyone he knows, which can be slightly annoying at times. He should be mad about this and tell him off about how stupid he was. He was no better than Hisashi if he harmed Izuku again like he just did. If anything, his lack of knowledge should be considered abuse or neglect. Izuku could still feel his dad beating himself up and tried to distract him by lazily leaning into his chest. Yagi looked down and shook his head fondly as he pulled him onto his lap and under his chin. "Are you feeling a little better now that I stopped poisoning you?" Izuku chuckled slightly and nodded against him as he closed his eyes to fall back asleep once more. Yagi kissed the top of his head and slowly laid him back down, covering him gently with a blanket. He then quietly slipped out of the room, closing the door behind him as to not accidentally wake him up again. He went back to the kitchen and threw out all the incense sticks he could find, no matter what scent they were. He was still so angry on how he could be so naive to this type of stuff, even though he swore to keep Izuku safe. He couldn't keep his son from harm when he was alive, and now he couldn't even protect him after his death. How can he even call himself Izuku's dad after all this? He was thrown from his self-deprecating thoughts once his phone started ringing with his signature All Might ringtone. He looked at the screen, seeing Aizawa's name across it, which instantly made him wonder why he was calling. Aizawa usually sends texts to avoid talking altogether, being the introvert that he is, which means this is something serious. "Hello?" he said with a curious but cautious tone. "Yagi, I need to talk to you about something you could help us with. The Heroes Commission has been monitoring higher rates of odd thefts in the city for the last week. They're weird because the items they are stealing aren't exactly valuable. Things such as meats, blankets, or even heating lamps are being reported missing at a rapid pace, no matter many heroes we spread out." Toshinori jerked his head back slightly in confusion over why Aizawa was telling him this and why villains were stealing items like that. "Wait, how would I be of use to you guys for some petty theft issues? Wouldn't that kind of work be more suitable for the rookie heroes that need that type of experience under their belt?" Yagi said curiously. Don't get him wrong, he understands that any type of villainy is serious, but he still doesn't understand how he could help when there are so many other heroes out there that would be happy to do so. "Trust me, we've been pulling from those sources as much as possible, but this seems to be a bit more deeper than we originally thought. They have all been reported taking these stolen items to one abandoned building on the outskirts of the city. We don't know what we would be walking into if we raided it, since there has been so many villains being reported circulating there. That little fact is exactly why we're asking for your help. You're skilled in this type of thing, and if you can truly use your strength like you used to, then it wouldn't matter how many villains there are." After hearing what Aizawa was asking, he sighed tiredly. "You know, I'm retired Shouta. I don't want to interfere with all of that anymore," he said, unmoved from Aizawa's explanation. "You have your quirk back, Yagi. You could easily pull this off without straining yourself or Midoriya." "Ah yes, was. The whole reason he wanted to stay away from professional heroism was to protect his son from harm. He knew if Izuku knew about this, he would immediately jump at the chance to take down this weird operation, which is exactly why he won't know about it. Not happening, Aizawa. You know my stance on involving Izuku on anything related to physical violence, and I won't have him taken advantage of for his abilities." He heard Aizawa sigh in annoyance and mumble something about this stubborn bastard before he continued. "Don't pretend like you don't know how useful you two would be on the field. You are back at your full strength, and Midoriya can also use his version of One for All on top of that. You would be a fool for not using those skills," Aizawa said, steadily raising his voice. Toshinori was starting to get really irritated with Aizawa trying to involve himself in his son's personal safety and privacy. He gets how they would be helpful in this situation, but Aizawa nor Nezu could command him to do anything involving his son. "I will not be swayed on this, Aizawa. If I think Izuku would be better off away from villainous activity, you should respect my decision and keep him out of this," Yagi said, matching Aizawa's anger. Before Shouta could respond, Yagi hung up the phone, growing tired of hearing this stupid idea. If they needed a powerful hero in all of this, they could ask Endeavor, since he's the #1 hero now and it's his responsibility. Even if Aizawa is right and he can use his quirk freely again, his All Might days are over, and it is going to stay that way now that he has Izuku to take care of. As Toshinori continued to calm himself down, Izuku walked down the hallway slowly while he yawned and rubbed his eyes. He looked at his dad and saw clear irritation across his face, which made him instantly wonder what happened. "Are you okay? You look a bit angry," Izuku said with a bit of worry. Yagi looked up, not knowing Izuku entered the room, but responded once he realized what he asked. Ah, nothing important, just Izawa asking me some teaching stuff is all. He said as convincingly as possible. Izuku tilted his head a tad, sensing that his dad was lying about whatever he was talking about. He wanted to question him, but he also wanted to respect his privacy. Okay then. Was he trying to convince you to go back into teaching again? Izuku said, going along with the obvious lie his dad told him. Something like that, but he knows my stance and I won't keep repeating myself. Anyway, are you feeling any better than you were after that nap? Yagi said, trying to avoid the topic of Izawa altogether. Yeah, I feel fine now, I can actually move without feeling droopy. Izuku said with a smile. Yagi nodded and smiled back. Good, then maybe you would be up for a trip into the city for some shopping. Izuku nodded excitedly as he quickly went to go get changed. Yagi chuckled and went to go get ready himself for a hopefully normal day. No matter what Izawa said, he will fight tooth and nail to keep his child away from that chaos. Buzzard looked at the large black egg that sat on top of the soft blanketed nest, lit up by a heat lamp. Stealing that thing was the best decision of his life from how much praise he got from the boss. At first, he was suspicious of bringing him a dud egg, so he had their doctor scan it to see for himself. Luckily for him, there was a near fully developed dragon embryo curled up perfectly within the shell. He didn't know what breed it was from how little he knew about dragons, but he did see through the ultrasound picture that it had 4 legs. He did know that 4 legs meant it wasn't a wyvern, which is exactly what his boss wanted. As he stewed in his accomplishment, another villain walked through the door and looked at him with a sneer once he noticed Buzzard's clear internal boasting. You may have got on the boss's good side for now, but we all know you'll screw up in the future, discrediting yourself again like you always do. When that happens, I will be there to watch you fall from your little pedestal you put yourself on. Buzzard rolled his eyes, clearly not believing a word the man said. What's wrong, Scavenger? Do you hate the fact you are no longer the boss's lapdog? Buzzard said with cockiness. Scavenger angrily got into Buzzard's face, holding himself back from throwing a punch. Like I said, you will fall from the sky soon enough, and trust me when I say I will be the one to collect your corpse off the ground when you do. Scavenger left in a huff while Buzzard kept his smirk going. He looked at the egg once more, hoping it would hatch soon and grow fast, so everyone here would get reminded of his status as the boss's favorite. They will all regret every threat they threw at him once this beast was born. He will make sure of it. Izawa was growing more and more irritated with All Might's refusal to cooperate. He understands not wanting to put Midoriya in harm's way, but the problem child is a strong fighter that can easily handle himself. Before he died, he witnessed Midoriya take down multiple villains that were stronger than him on several occasions. Even though the kid knew he was likely to lose those fights, he still pulled through every time. His next move was going to be a risky one and probably going to start a fight, but it will prove his point that Midoriya is of high use. He also suspected that Yagi didn't tell the kid about his plan, and he knew the kid would want a part to play in it. He pulled out his phone and punched in the number he hoped stayed the same even after everything that has happened. He pressed the call button, and it surprisingly rang only once when he heard the problem child pick up. Hello? Who's this? Izuku said with caution. He suddenly remembered he never gave his number to the kid, which was probably a stupid decision on his end. Midoriya, it's Izawa. I know it's late, but I had an important question for you. Izuku was surprised to hear his sensei on the other end, but he found it welcomed nonetheless. Oh hi Mr. Izawa, what did you need? Izuku asked eagerly. Hey kid, did All Might tell you anything about the villains that we discussed the other day? Izuku knew that his dad didn't talk about anything related to villains since he passed, but now he understood why he got so mad after that call. Well, he said he talked to you, but he said was for teaching reasons. Izawa should have known Yagi kept it a secret from him. He swore he was treating the kid like defenseless infant that was made of glass. If he didn't tell you, then I will bring you up to speed myself. Izawa then told him everything he relayed to Yagi and even added more details that he recently learned from new observations. He ended with asking Izuku for help in the raid they were planning on doing soon. Izuku knew his dad was hiding something about that phone call, but he never would have thought it was this serious. He always told him that lying was bad and caused more conflict than not, but then he lies to him about all of this. He grew angry that his dad rejected Mr. Izawa's request for help and would have to confront him later about why he turned his back on his friends. I would be glad to help Mr. Izawa. I know how usefully I could be for something like this, and I won't let dad decide for me like he obviously tried to. Izuku said with anger. Izawa knew the kid would want to be involved, but there was only one problem. How far can you be from All Might before you start fading or feeling pain? Izuku internally cringed because he knew his dad didn't know about his after-hour activities while he was asleep. He still required to sleep to keep his solidity up, but he didn't need to rest as much as he used to when he was alive. Well, dad doesn't know about this, but while he's asleep, I'll sometimes train to distance myself from him like you and Principal Nezu suggested. So far, I can get outside the city without feeling that pulling pain like I did a few months ago. Aizawa was surprised to hear that Midoriya did that type of training alone. He was usually very open with Yagi about stuff like that, especially since he was the one who originally trained him. He wasn't going to scold the boy for it, if anything he was happy he made the decision for himself. You didn't have to put yourself through that alone, kid, but I get why you did. All Might can be quite defensive when it comes to your well-being, which I get. I would not want to see you hurt either. Aizawa said honestly. Izuku slightly blushed at the concern since Aizawa was not one for showing his emotion, but appreciated it none of the less. He also agreed with how his dad can be a bit overprotective of him at times, especially after his death. Did you need me to help with this raid anytime soon? He asked eagerly. We will be raiding tonight about 9 p.m. once the sun is completely set. You can meet me in front of UA an hour before then. Aizawa informed him. Izuku agreed and told him he would be there not a minute later. When they said their goodbyes, Yagi decided to walk in the room looking at him suspiciously. Who were you talking to? Izuku decided to follow in his dad's footsteps and lied to the best of his ability. Oh, that was Iida. They were asking to see if I wanted to spend the night tomorrow at the dorms to catch up. Yagi apparently believed it because he dropped his suspicious gaze and looked like he was thinking about saying yes to the suggestion. Well, I don't see why not. It has been a while since you've seen them all and I do need to talk to Nezu about a few things. Izuku felt a little bad about lying to his dad, but he also knew he lied about this villain operation to him too. He was just getting even, that's all. Aizawa stood in front of UA's gates waiting for Izuku to come down from the dorms. He knew they were going behind Yagi's back and he would face the consequences later after this villain activity was stopped. He would protect the kid as best he could, but what Yagi doesn't take into consideration is that Midoriya was already dead. It was horrible and morbid to think about, but it was the truth none of the less. Izuku could use his ghostly abilities on top of his normal quirk. How Yagi is ignoring this fact is beyond him. Aizawa then heard a tree branch creak behind him, causing him to turn around and see Izuku jogging towards him. Are you ready for this? Aizawa asked as Izuku stopped in front of him with a smile. Of course. More than ready. Izuku said with excitement and determination. Aizawa nodded his head and gestured towards the car that was parked at the curb waiting for them. They both got in the back seat and took off unaware of a furious Toshinori watching them leave. Once they both arrived a few blocks away from their destination, they were met with a large group of high-ranking pro-heroes waiting for them to arrive. He saw a few people he knew like Endeavor, Mirko, and Snipe, but some he doesn't think he's ever met before. Alright, now that we know everyone's here, let's go over how we are going to do this, Endeavor said with authority. Snipe, we are going to have you sit at the neighboring building's roof to ensure no villains try to escape and alert any backup they could have. Mirko, I will need your help in our front lines if things go south. There could be hundreds of them for all we know, and you're one of our best melee fighters. Eraser, you will stay to the shadows the best you can and take out villains that could be guarding any entrances we come across. Lastly, DEKU, you will first scout the internals as thoroughly as you can and then report back what you find. The rest of you, do not attack until I give the command and stay hidden. We can't go a hair out of line on this or we will ruin everything. Izuku was more than ready to use his skills to help in the battle between heroes and villains. He no longer had to worry about getting mortally wounded and can help those who need it without gaining new scars in the process. Keeping these thoughts in mind, he looked back at Aizawa and Endeavor waiting for their go-ahead. Endeavor gave him a nod signifying to go for it, which he did without hesitation. He turned himself invisible and phased through the main doors without making a sound. He took in his surroundings and found a dark hallway that went both ways with many doors lining each side. He was told they suspected the main part of the base was in the lower levels, causing him look for the stairwells. It took him only a minute to find what he was looking for and entered the giant spiral-like staircase. They went all the way to the bottom. He jumped straight down the middle using float to catch himself near the end and found a single metal door that looked recently installed. He didn't hesitate to phase through it but was startled when he came face to face with a villain. He paused thinking he was spotted but soon realized that the villain couldn't see him. Izuku slowly moved around him and continued further down the corridor, only to find more doors leading to a few different offices, makeshift bedrooms, and what looked to be a few research labs. There was not as many villains as he thought there would be, but he assumed they could out running errands for whatever reason. He continued to look around the other rooms until he came across another lab and saw a weird black thing sitting on a pile of blankets connected to wires. He tilted his head in confusion and got closer to see a black stone-looking thing that was covered in equally black scales. It was obviously important from how carefully they were monitoring it, but he still couldn't figure out what it was. He looked at the screen the wires were connected to and soon figured out that this thing was no stone, it was an egg. He looked at the pictures they took inside the shell, and he clearly saw something he never thought he would see in real life. A dragon. An actual dragon. He knew dragons were nearly extinct, and some people actually questioned their existence because of how rare they were. He looked back at the egg in awe and quickly realized that this poor creature could not stay in the hands of villains. He knew dragons were powerful animals and could easily destroy entire cities with their fire alone. Villains would easily take advantage of that and use it for their own evil doings. He knew he couldn't let that happen, and he immediately went back out in the hallway to memorize which door it was in before going back to the surface to report what he saw. Izawa was starting to get nervous from how long Izuku was taking, but he was quickly relieved when they saw him run out the same front doors he entered through. He ran over to Endeavor and gave a quick debrief on what he found without including the dragon egg part. Do you know the exact number of villains you saw? Izuku shook his head. I didn't count the exact amount, but I would say there was about 30 in there now. Endeavor nodded and repeated the information to the surrounding heroes through his radio earpiece. He told Izawa and a few other talented stealth heroes to go back in and take as many villains down as they could without being caught. Izuku followed them and quietly guided them through the exact way he took, with the other heroes staying on the upper levels, ready to attack if need be. Izawa took out a handful of weaker villains and put their unconscious bodies into empty rooms so they weren't found. The other heroes were able to do the same until one villain they didn't see in an extra room pushed an alarm button, setting off the entire building into chaos. Every hero was quick to react, and soon everyone was fighting to the best of their abilities. They were dumb to set the alarm off since it told the other heroes above them that their cover was blown. A few seconds later, the rest of the heroes came bursting through the doors, along with more villains pouring out from the deeper levels of the basement. Izuku activated his quirk and was taking down the weaker villains with ease. Every time they tried to strike him, their fists would phase right through his body, as if he were using Miro's quirk. While the fighting continued, Izuku was able to slip away and find the room with the egg in it. He was able to phase through the wall and quickly detach the egg from all the wiring it was connected to, causing the alarms on the monitor to go off. He carefully put it in the bag he brought and used one of the blankets from the nest to wrap it in to prevent cracking. Before he could go back and help with the battle, he heard a massive explosion that shook the entire building. He was afraid it was going to collapse by the time the shockwaves dissipated, but once they did, silence followed. He phased through the wall once more only to be met with a thick cloud of dust and groaning from villains caught in the blast. Izuku frantically looked around for the other heroes to see if anyone was injured, but saw a large figure at the end of the hallway. His heart dropped once he realized who it was. He knew that silhouette anywhere. He was so dead. Yagi was seeing red by the time he arrived at the villain-infested building. He was kinda glad this was a raid because that meant he could take his rage out without feeling too bad about it later. As he entered the building in his muscle form, he heard the shouting from the battle below him, meaning they were on the lower levels. He found the same staircase Izuku did and repeated his actions by dropping down the middle of the spiral. He landed hard, putting a crater in the floor in the process, and looked through the door in front of him to see everyone fighting with one another. He walked in menacingly without his signature smile on his face, causing him to look far more intimidating than he normally did. Endeavor was the first to notice him as he looked on in shock, not knowing he got his quirk back. A single stupid villain decided to launch a punch at him, which Yagi took without being phased. Toshinori paused before the villain stumbled back in shock, no knowing how his attack didn't work. He looked down at his opponent and said in a low, dangerous voice, "My turn." Before he pulled his fist back to send out a huge blast of strength. Izawa saw him about to send off one of his famous smashes before he called out, trying to stop him. "Wait, All Might." He yelled desperately, knowing what happens next. Yagi apparently wasn't listening because he thrusted his fist forward with immense speed, causing a massive blast to destroy the place around them, including all villains in its direction. Everyone was blown away from the strong wind pressure it produced, including half the building and its cement foundation. Everything came to a standstill as the dust started to settle. Yagi also went still until he heard one of the doors open that happened to survive the punch he threw. He at first thought it was another villain who wanted to test their luck, but he quickly realized it was a child that was soon going to feel his wrath very quickly. Izuku was clearly surprised and scared once he figured out how much trouble he was in, but he was still ready to defend himself. "What hell were you thinking?" Yagi said furiously as he stomped up to Izuku. "I was helping those who needed me." Izuku defended. Yagi looked down at him with more anger as he continued his rant. "Do you know how dangerous this was? You could have been. What? Killed. I don't know if you know this, but I'm already dead." Izuku said, matching his dad's anger. "Aizawa put you up to this, didn't he? I should have known he would have persisted in this stupid plan of his." Yagi said, wanting to strangle Aizawa for putting Izuku through this behind his back. "He came to me because he knew I would want to help and he knew you wouldn't allow it." Clearly he was right since you lied to me about the whole thing. Don't even start with me about lying, young man. Not only did you lie about coming here, but you apparently trained yourself without my knowledge, even though we agreed we wouldn't. Izuku was getting more and more furious about his dad treating him like a child who needed his constant protection. I don't have to tell you everything. Besides, you're acting like I don't know how to defend myself, even though I proved I can many times before. The next thing Yagi said would be words he would forever regret. If you know how to defend yourself so well, then tell me why you died so easily. Izuku and Yagi both stopped from shock over what was said. Izuku's eyes immediately filled with tears, while Yagi tried to reach for him to take back those cruel words. Before he could, Izuku darted and disappeared into the night, clearly having no intention on coming back. Yagi stood there having all anger leave him instantly, only to be replaced with guilt, self-loathing, and heartbreak. What the fuck was wrong with him? How the hell could he say something like that to his main source of love, happiness, and pride? To his own child. He deflated back into his thin form, collapsing to his knees in silent tears. This was all his fault. If he just stopped being so selfish and helped them with this damn mission, all of this could have been avoided. As Yagi started to go into self-destruction mode once more, he felt a hand on his shoulder that he knew to be Izawa's. It'll be alright, Yagi, he'll come around once he calms down. We all say things we don't mean when we're angry. Izawa said, clearly hearing the whole thing. Don't touch me, Yagi said as he aggressively pulled his shoulder away from Izawa's hand. You have been interfering with our lives since the day you discovered he came back. You then convinced him to lie to me so you can use him like your own personal weapon. Yagi got up to look him in the eye as his rage came back full force. I will warn you this, if you go near either of us again, I will make sure your life becomes a living hell. He said with sincerity. Izawa backed up and allowed Toshinori to walk away in a rage. He looked on with a neutral face, knowing they would both eventually see reason when they relaxed for a bit. He knew Midoriya was probably hurt deeply right now, which meant he wouldn't be seen for a while. That kid knew how to stay hidden when he wanted to, going off of all the practice he had as a child. He just hoped that they would both come around quickly. Izuku couldn't stop crying as he walked through the city, invisible to all who crossed him. How could his All Might say that to him? He knew he was too weak to save himself that day, he didn't have to keep reminding him of it. He kept walking, not caring about other people right now, until he came to another abandoned building that seemed to be empty this time. He drifted through the door, not bothering to look for other people, and sat on the dust-covered couch in the destroyed living room. Through his tears, he looked down again and took notice of the bag he still had. He wiped away his tears the best he could and pulled out the egg he saved from those villains with great care. He held the scale-covered egg and noticed the scales starting to fall off. He quickly became worried, thinking the dragon was dying, but he also noticed how warm it was becoming. When he picked it up for the first time, it was nowhere near this warm, but now it was almost becoming hard to hold from the heat coming from it. He held it for a few more moments before he nearly dropped it from feeling movement coming from inside. He quickly put it on the couch cushion to stop it from falling and watched it start to wiggle around. It's about to hatch, he said out loud to no one as he witnessed a few cracks start to appear. Izuku looked on in excitement as he realized he was getting to watch a real dragon hatch in front of him. The egg cracked and wiggled a bit more before it suddenly crumbled away, revealing a little black dragon surprisingly covered in feathers. The dragon made a series of tiny chirps and clicking noises, trying to figure out how to function in its new body. Izuku watched, not really knowing what to do, but he still tried to help the best he could by pulling off a few pieces of shell still sticking to its body. Its feathers were damp from the shell, and he knew it would eventually get hungry when it realized what hungry meant. The dragon seemed to be taking in its surroundings before setting its eyes on Izuku. He looked right back at it with a smile. Hello, welcome to the world, little guy. My name's Izuku Midoriya, but you probably can't understand that. He said with amusement. The dragon clearly liked him, judging how it immediately crawled into his lap. He began to help clean up its feathers a bit more with the blanket he took, but he started to wonder if it was a boy or girl. He knew there was specific ways to tell the gender of a dragon, since they didn't have obvious ways to check, but it's been a while since he read about it. He took out his phone to look up the information he needed and found a few sources saying to look the end of the tail and their body spikes. If it's a male, the end of the tail should be pointed and sharp to the touch, but if it's female, it should be smooth and soft. Izuku gently grabbed the end of its tail and tried to feel through the feathers if there were any small spikes. He wasn't 100% sure due to the feathers, but it felt soft. He read further on for another test, and it said to check the elbows of its front legs. If there were small spikes, it was a male, but if they were absent, it would be a female. Izuku then went on to check and found no small spikes behind her front legs. Well, it looks like you're a female. Izuku told the dragon with a smile. She chirped back with high-pitched noises, voicing her content with Izuku's presence and pets he was giving her. He began to look up more about how to take care of newborn dragons and found out they needed softer cooked meat in small pieces every few hours. He began to get a little worried on how he could raise an actual dragon without interference from animal scientists that would want to take her for research. He wanted her to be as free as possible without having to worry about being hunted down or trapped in an exhibit for life. As he thought more about the future for the dragon, he heard his phone buzz again. He immediately ignored it knowing it was All Might trying to get a hold of him yet again. He was still hurt over what All Might said and he didn't want to accept his apology so easily like he always had in the past. He heard his phone chime indicating a new voicemail was left which got him a little curious of what it said. One side of him wanted to stay angry and make All Might regret what he said, but the other side really wanted to go back home to him. He knew he also did things that All Might had every right to be mad about, but he still shouldn't have said what he did. You didn't see him point out his traumatic past to hurt him deeper just because he was angry. He knows he wasn't strong enough to fight off his stupid father that night. All Might didn't have to rub it in. I mean he really tried to move and stop that knife from cutting his neck open, but he was too drugged to do anything. As he was venting to himself, his phone went off again which annoyed him even more. Couldn't he just take the hint that he didn't want to talk right now? He picked up the phone to look at the screen and saw the call was not from All Might but Mr. Izawa. It took a second to register, but he answered the call thinking it was something to with what they found after the raid. Hello? He said still not really wanting to talk to anyone right now. Hey kid, how are you feeling? Izuku furrowed his eyebrows wondering why Izawa would ask that. He couldn't get hurt anymore, so shouldn't he know he was fine? I'm not hurt or anything if that's what you mean. Izuku said still a bit confused. I wasn't talking about physically kid. I heard you and All Might's little discussion and wanted to make sure you weren't too upset like he was. Izuku wasn't sure how he felt about his teacher hearing all that, but he guessed it couldn't be helped now. I'm fine. He said unconvincingly. He heard Izawa sigh before he continued to explain what happened after he left. Your dad was pretty upset after you ran, and I'm sure he's been trying to reach you ever since. Izuku felt angry and sad at the same time causing tears start to appear, which only made him more annoyed with himself. Why couldn't he control his stupid tears like a normal person? All Might deserved his silence no matter how much his subconscious told him otherwise. I don't want to talk to him right now. He'll be fine by himself for a while. He said with only a hint of guilt. Izawa knew Midoriya was not only hurting over the words that were said, but being parted from All Might was harder on him, even if he wouldn't admit it. Never mind him, what happened to the Villian base after I left? He asked trying to change the subject. Exactly what you would expect. We captured all the remaining Villians and took siege to the base for evidence. Izawa said nonchalantly. Izuku hummed and looked over at the sleeping dragon, wondering if he should tell Izawa about her. He shook his head not wanting his teacher to take her away to another facility that could mistreat her for their own personal gain. His phone started to beep again, indicating that someone else was calling. He instantly knew who it was without even looking at the screen, causing more tears to burn the back of his eyes. I'm sorry sensei, but I got to go. He said as he hung up before his teacher could respond. He hovered his finger over the answer button, contemplating if he should even try to talk to him. He was still so mad, but he knows he can't ignore him forever. He apparently wasn't fast enough because the ringing stopped and his phone notified that he missed a call. He stared at the screen and thought until another notification popped up showing another voicemail being left. He slightly hesitated again before pressing play on the earlier message All Might left. Izuku, I know you're probably still pissed at me and you have every right to be after what I said. I was way out of line in every way and shouldn't have said that no matter how angry I was. I understand you don't want to talk yet, but please. Please could just come back home at least. The voicemail ended as Izuku held back his tears from the desperation he heard in his voice. He waited few moments to calm down until he pressed play on the next one. At first there was silence and what sounded like muffled sobs that caused his tears to come back full force. Please I can't lose you again, Yagi said in a cracking teary voice. The voicemail ended and Izuku curled into himself sobbing loudly. His anger was completely replaced with guilt and heartache for causing the amount of emotional pain to All Might to his dad as badly as he has been. He knew he had to go back, but the only issue was the baby dragon he would need to bring with him. The dragon must have sensed he was thinking about her because she woke up and looked directly at him with curiosity. She got up out of her spot on the couch and crawled into Izuku's lap, making more chirping noises as if to get his attention. Izuku chuckled slightly through his tears as he ran his fingers through her soft black feathers. Izuku never really got to take a good look at her as closely as he wanted since he was so distracted by his phone. He took the chance while he had it and noticed a few new things, such as her eyes being a strikingly dark purple that could rival the dust clouds of space. Her wings and feathers were slightly iridescent like a raven bird, and the end of her tail had longer feathers that slightly fanned out like a parrot's tail. Her claws were tiny, but sharp and looked almost like tiny silver razors. Come to think of it, he never knew dragons could have feathers, since they were usually covered in scales. He wondered how long it would be before she was strong enough to fly and breathe fire. Before he started on his journey home, he began to think of a name he should call her, since the dragon wouldn't really cut it. He looked at her deep and thought of what would match her best, and a few names came to mind like Nexus, Sapphire, or Prism, if wanting to go off of her looks. He kept brainstorming until he thought of a name that sounded more well suited for her. How about Ebony? I think that sounds pretty and it describes the shade of your feathers accurately. Izuku asked the dragon. She looked at him and tilted her head, not understanding what he was saying, which made Izuku laugh a bit. You may not understand your name yet, but you'll learn to respond to it later. He said cheerfully. Even though he only had Ebony for a day, she already knew how to make him feel better when he was distressed. As he opened the front door to the abandoned house, he sighed, preparing himself to see his dad again and the tears that would undoubtedly follow. He put Ebony in his bag to hide her and starting walking in the direction of home. Izuku stood in front of his and his dad's apartment door, trying to figure out what he was going to say. He knew they would have some healing to do after what they both did to each other, but he doesn't want to ruin their bond over this stupid fight. He felt Ebony shift a bit in her bag, which also made him think about how he was gonna tell his dad about her too. He wouldn't let him take her without a fight, but he also didn't think he would try either. He quietly phased through the door and looked around the dark room that had no signs of his dad. He knew it was the middle of the night, but his dad would fall asleep on the couch watching TV at times if he got too tired. Ebony started to make her clicking noises again, which caused him to pull her out of the bag to quiet her down. It was of no luck when she started to hiss and become louder, causing Izuku to panic a little from not wanting to wake up his dad. He then realized he completely forgot to feed her and quickly went to the fridge, hoping for some leftover meats his dad would sometimes cook. Luckily his dad ordered a meal with meat, recently going by the leftover pork cutlets with ramen. He took the pork and cut it up into small bite-sized pieces and gave Ebony one of them to test if she liked it. She sniffed the pork for a second and licked it as if she was deciding if she liked the taste or not. She apparently decided it was good when she swallowed the piece practically whole. He gave her a few more pieces until she turned away after he offered her a fifth cut. She decided it was time to explore as she sniffed her surroundings curiously. She tried to squeeze herself in every crevice she found, only for Izuku to pick her up and put her somewhere else less tight-fitting. She was surprisingly silent as he watched her move around the room like a cat. It was almost like she knew they had to be quiet. Just like her first night alive, she found the couch and curled up in a comfortable position once she was satisfied with her environment. Izuku watched her as she seemed to lay down for the night, clearly exhausted from the journey. Izuku smiled as he put the blanket from the back of the couch around her to make her feel more warm and secure. Once he knew she would be fine for a while, he looked towards the back of the hall towards the bedroom, wondering if his dad was asleep. Judging how he didn't hear anything, he assumed he should be careful so he didn't wake him. He tiptoed down the hall and slowly turned the handle of the door to avoid the loud clicking sound it made. He was successful and was met with a dark room with an obvious All Might-shaped lump on the bed. Still not wanting to wake him, he snuck around to his side of the bed and used float to lay down as careful as possible. He adjusted himself the best he could and closed his eyes in exhaustion due to dealing with the last couple days. From his fight with his dad, the raid of the villain base, and figuring out how to take care of Ebony, he just wanted to sleep for a good 12 hours. Before he could fully fall asleep, he felt his dad shift and change the side he was laying on. He thought that would be it until he felt arms come around his torso pulling him close. He tried to stop his tears as his dad buried his face in his hair, slightly trembling. It was a silent gesture until he heard his dad whisper in a wobbly voice, "I'm so sorry." That was all it took for Izuku to flip around and latch onto his dad like Velcro as he allowed the tears to flow. They still had obvious things to talk about, but for now, he just wanted to enjoy being home with his dad again. Those idiots. How could they be this weak? Buzzard yelled in anger. The boss is going to kill me over this if he figures out it happened under my watch. He said with a hint of fear. Well, he started to panic over what would come next for him. Another villain walked through the debris and came up to Buzzard with uncertainty. Sir, now that the dragon's gone, do you think we should tell the boss? Maybe he could deploy more. No, absolutely not. The boss will not hear a word about this unless you want him to kill us all. We will search for the beast ourselves and find it before anyone realizes it's gone. The heroes probably took it to one of their high security facilities anyway, and if we figure out which one it is, we can repay their visit by letting Berserk have a little fun, he said with a smirk. The other villain mirrored his features as he used his phone to call up Berserk's caretaker. He will not allow his success story to crumble this easily. He will find that thing if it was the last thing he did, even if it meant his sanity. Izuku woke up to what sounded like a muffled high-pitched screech coming from the living room. Every bit of sleepiness he had vanished as he looked up at his dad to see if he was still asleep. Thankfully he was and didn't seem to hear Ebony's calls, which came as a relief. He slowly allowed his body to phase through the hold he was in and quickly took a shortcut through the walls towards the living room. Once Ebony realized he was there, she calmed down and jumped off the couch, only to climb up his leg for attention. Izuku gave a single chuckle as he picked her up and put her on his shoulder. "Are you hungry again?" he asked as he went towards the fridge. She gave some excited clicks, already understanding the fridge meant food. Izuku then pulled out the rest of the pork he had and continued cutting into more small pieces so she wouldn't choke. As he slowly fed her, he heard movement coming from down the hallway and was temporarily blinded by the kitchen light coming on. This must have startled Ebony too because she immediately jumped back with a defensive hiss. Izuku looked up at a wide-eyed Toshinori looking at the little black creature on his kitchen counter. "What in the world is that?" he asked, still flabbergasted on what he was looking at. Oh, this is Ebony, I found her when we raided the villain base," he said nervously. Yagi looked between them both, not really knowing how to respond until he finally processed what Ebony was. "Is that an actual dragon?" he said with more shock lacing his voice. Izuku hunched his shoulders as he worried what his dad would do next. He knew how crazy the situation was and he didn't blame him for being confused or surprised by it. He just hoped his dad didn't tell him to send her away out of fear of what she is. What he didn't expect was his dad coming right up the Ebony and putting his hand out to allow her sniff him. Once Ebony realized he wasn't a threat, she allowed him to stroke her feathers gently. "I never would have guessed those villains were hiding a baby dragon in that place all along," Yagi said in awe. Izuku agreed and went on to further explain how he found her egg, along with other details he found out about dragons in general. "Ebony, huh? It matches her outfit, that's for sure," Yagi said as he got a closer look at her appearance. Izuku sighed in relief now knowing his dad was fine with Ebony's existence in their home. He hopes it would stay that way because he doesn't know how Ebony would react if she was parted from him. "You have to promise not to tell anyone about her dad, they will take her away forever if they knew," Izuku said pleadingly. He heard his dad sigh before he responded, "Son, I know you want to keep her, but this is a dragon we're talking about here. She needs to be somewhere where she can grow properly, and this apartment is far too small to handle a growing dragon," Yagi said, trying to get Izuku to see reason. Izuku looked down because he knew his dad was right, but that doesn't mean he can't find a place for her to stay when she got too big. "I can find a safe spot for her to live once she outgrows the apartment, but you can't tell the authorities, they'll put her in a cage forever," he said desperately. Yagi sighed once more and tried one more time to convince his son that this wasn't a good idea. "Izuku, I know you're attached, but this is a wild animal that needs more care than you can give her. It just doesn't seem right to keep her confined to such a small space." Izuku grew annoyed again as he picked up Ebony defensively. "You're not listening to what I'm saying. If scientists get a hold of her, they will do much worse than confine her, they'll use her as a science experiment," Izuku said in defiance. "And if you don't see that, then I will be glad to go somewhere else where we both can't be found," Izuku said, full of emotion as he started to walk away. Yagi quickly grabbed Izuku's arm to stop him from leaving again. "Enough, Izuku, you can't honestly think you can raise a dragon without anyone noticing. Even if I did keep it a secret, there is our neighbors that will undoubtedly call the authorities if they see her. Then there's the entire city reporting her once she gains the ability to fly, because you know she will follow you wherever you go when she can," he said, still trying to convince Izuku that this was ridiculous. Izuku pulled away, still holding a determined gaze, clearly not caring about his dad's argument. "Like I said, I will handle it when she gets too big. I know the risks involved, but they won't cause me to turn my back on her," Izuku said angrily. It was now Yagi's turn to start getting annoyed at his son's stubbornness. How could he not see the problems that would come with this choice? He knew he was smarter than this. "Izuku, you can be mad with me all you want, but I will stand by what I say and how this is a bad idea. You don't even know how to take care of her properly," he said, crossing his arms. Izuku stayed silent as he glared daggers at his dad, still not budging from his decision. Yagi glared back as he said his next statement with irritation. "I don't know where you got this idea of her becoming a science experiment, but dragons are a near-extinct species. They are highly protected and can't be used for cruel purposes like you think they can. If anything, she would probably be treated better than a human baby and would be monitored and cared for constantly to keep her healthy," he said, trying to reassure Izuku of Ebony's safety. Izuku looked down at Ebony as his arms and felt another sting of frustrating tears nip at his eyes. "If you think that option is so great, then tell me, how will they take care of her when she starts panicking when she realizes I'm gone?" he asked in a low voice. Yagi furrowed his eyebrows in confusion. "She will get used to new people, son. She's only a few days old, she'll grow out of it. He said, certain of himself. Izuku didn't say a word as he placed Ebony on the couch and left the room for a minute. Yagi looked greatly confused until Ebony started making chirping noises that quickly became loud screeches once she noticed Izuku was gone. Yagi looked at her not really knowing what to do as her screeches started to sound almost like howls. It was then when Izuku came back in the room, walking up to her, instantly quieting her calls. Ebony quickly crawled back up on his shoulder, not wanting to be left in the room if he decided to leave again. Izuku looked back at Yagi and explained one last time why he would never give up on the dragon. I know what it's like being abandoned by someone who was supposed to take care of you. It makes you think you're worthless and disposable, no matter how much they reassure you. I won't allow Ebony to feel the same pain I have for years. Izuku said with more tears building in his eyes. Yagi hung his head in defeat, knowing he lost this time around. He knew Izuku's piece of crap father was the reason why his son was so afraid of being left behind, and he swore he would never make him feel that way again. He also understood why Izuku saw himself as this dragon's caretaker, judging how he saved it, but he still doesn't know how this would work. Izuku wasn't budging from his choice and had no issue fighting off those who wanted to steal Ebony for their own selfish reasons. He doesn't understand how anyone could hurt or take advantage of an innocent animal just because they were born different. It wasn't Ebony's fault she was dragon, she didn't have the choice to be otherwise. Yagi was tired of fighting with Izuku and just wanted them to go back to normal before all this happened. He knew it wasn't that easy, but he hated how they seemed to be growing distant of late. Izuku was sitting on the couch giving Ebony his undivided attention until he sat down next to them, contemplating what he should say next. He didn't want this to turn into another argument by accident and create even more tension between them. I promise that I will keep Ebony a secret for as long as I can, but I can't control if someone around us discovers her. Yagi said as carefully as possible, still wanting his son to realize the dangers. Izuku kept his gaze on Ebony as he thought about the warning, still understanding the possibility of being exposed. Even though he knew the risks, he would never leave Ebony to anyone he didn't deeply trust. I know what could happen if someone saw her, but I can't just give her up over a possibility. Would you leave me behind if you knew villains discovered my existence and tried to take me for their experiments? Izuku asked, still trying to get his point across. Yagi immediately pulled Izuku onto his lap and held him close as he spoke. I will never allow anyone to take you from me without a fight. If villains tried to kidnap you because of what you are, they would be dead before they hit the ground. He said in a threatening yet honest tone. Izuku returned Yagi's embrace, staying silent for a moment to savor the affection before he continued. Then please understand why I can't let Ebony be taken. He said, trying to hold more tears back. Like I said, I won't tell anyone about her, but if someone else sees her and decides to report her, I can't do much to control the results. Yagi said with sympathy. Izuku said nothing as he nodded against his dad's chest, feeling determined to protect Ebony to the best of his ability. He won't see her become someone else's play toy. Izawa was getting tired of the silent treatment he was getting from Yagi ever since the whole raid situation. He knew that he should have told him about including Midoriya in the mission, but he also knew that he would say no, no matter how convincing he was. Ashinori is acting like he was using Midoriya as a piece of meat that had no choice in the matter, when in reality, the kid greatly helped take down a growing problem at the root. He was also angry at Yagi, thinking he didn't care about Midoriya's safety. He greatly cared for the problem child and still sees his death as something he could have stopped. Midoriya changed his perspective on what a real hero should be and gave him hope for the future generations. Deciding to take measures into his own hands, he took out his phone and texted Midoriya asking about his whereabouts. After waiting a few minutes, he got impatient and decided to call instead. It rang a few times and he almost gave up before he heard someone on the other end he wasn't expecting. You really can't take a hint, can you, erase her? The voice said in an aggressive tone. Even though Shouta was surprised, he kept his voice even and calm. Yagi, this is getting ridiculous. You can't just expect me to drop you both out of my life completely over some stupid lie. He said, trying to get Yagi to see reason. I warned you that I had no intention on keeping you around Izuku anymore, and I meant it. You are making him more reckless by teaching him to go behind my back every time he disagrees with me. We never got along in the beginning, and now I see that was for the best. If you continue to try contacting Izuku, I will make sure your career ends today. Yagi said in a dangerous tone before he hung up. Izawa gave a frustrated growl before he went to his room and changed into his hero costume. He knew he probably shouldn't go to the home of a man who wanted to practically strangle him, but it was his only shot to talk to Midoriya about what's going on. He exited his home and started walking towards the apartment building, still annoyed that he even had to do this. The only thing he wanted to understand was what happened between the two after that fight they had. He knew Midoriya was a sensitive child and knows how bad the kid can spiral when he's emotionally unstable. That brief phone call they had yesterday didn't give him much to go off of and he just wanted to know if he's okay at the very least. As he walked down the street that held Yagi's apartment building, he was stopped by a voice that was quietly talking to someone else. He couldn't make out what the voice was saying, but he continued walking until he saw who he was looking for. Midoriya was bent down hovering over an animal of some sort, but he couldn't see it very well due to the lack of sunlight in the sky. He quietly walked up behind Izuku and looked closer at what looked like a large crow of some sort, but quickly realized it was something much more interesting. "What the hell is that?" Aizawa said, finally breaking his stealthy approach. Izuku fell back with a shout from the unexpected visitor until he quickly recovered and grabbed the creature Aizawa was trying to investigate. "MMR. Aizawa. What are you doing here?" Izuku said, clearly flustered and trying to hide the strange animal under his jacket. "I will repeat my first question, what the hell is that?" Aizawa said, gesturing at the noisy lump in Izuku's jacket. Izuku stepped back a bit while covering the lump with his arms and nothing. "It's just a hurt bird I found is all," Izuku said, ending with nervous laughter. Aizawa narrowed his eyes, stepping in front of Izuku with his usual intimidation. "You're a terrible liar, kid, so how about the truth this time?" he said, unimpressed. Izuku gave a small whine as he looked down at the bump he held under his clothes. He contemplated if he should tell his teacher about Ebony's existence or refuse and run. He began to think about turning invisible for a second before Aizawa saw right through him and reacted faster than he did. Before he could even blink, Aizawa used his capture weapon to wrap him up and pull him close, reminding him of his first day at UA. Wait, I promise I wasn't gonna do anything." Aizawa stopped any more excuses from being said as he covered Izuku's mouth in the cloth he wielded so effortlessly. "Don't even think about running after I came all this way to speak to you," Aizawa said in his teacher voice. "I won't ask again, what are you hiding that you are so afraid of me seeing?" he said with authority. Izuku's eyes widened as he felt Ebony wiggle out of his grasp and climb down his leg. He looked down instinctively, which caused Shouta to do the same. Aizawa kept Izuku in his weapon as he looked down at a creature that he never thought he would see in person. "Is that what I think it is?" he asked, visibly shocked as he looked down at the small creature. Izuku was still tied up but tried to talk the best he could to explain what she is. "She's a dragon," Izuku said in a muffled voice. Aizawa let his weapon loosen its hold as he bent down to the newborn dragon, who was not happy with his sudden intrusion. She gave the best hisses she could as she tried to look as threatening as possible when he reached for her. Ebony gave a small nip to Shouta's finger that caused a small pinprick of blood to appear. He pulled his hand back, which caused Izuku to pick her back up with an apologetic look. "Sorry about that, she gets scared meeting new people," he said, trying to calm the dragon down. Aizawa stood back up, still staring at the rare specimen in his student's arms with a sense of awe. "Where did you find it?" Aizawa said with fascination of how the problem child came across something like this. "I found her at the Villian base we took down in one of the labs. I didn't know what she was at first since she was still an egg, but I took her once I realized they were going to use her as a weapon." Izuku explained, already justifying why he took her. Aizawa was about to start asking more questions before he was suddenly hanging by his shirt collar in front of a fist of All Might. "I told you what would happen if I saw you near him again," Yagi said, already preparing a punch. Aizawa quickly used his quirk and cancelled out one for all before he was punched square in the face. He may have erased Yagi's quirk just in time, but he was still hit hard from how much muscle All Might still had in his stronger form. Yagi was about to strike him again as he gained his bearings, but was stopped by Izuku grabbing him with Black Whip by the arm. "Wait, Dad, he was just checking in on us, he wasn't doing anything wrong," Izuku said, trying to calm Toshinori down before he killed Aizawa. "He shouldn't be even talking to you after what he pulled. He's practically teaching you to disregard your own safety for his own personal gain," he said with his fist still ready to strike Aizawa once more. Shouta slowly got back up on his feet as his nose bled from the strike, still prepared to defend himself from the former #1 hero. "Midoriya is his own person, he has every right to decide from himself. You can't keep him to yourself forever, Yagi," Aizawa said as he activated his quirk once more. Izuku slightly panicked when his dad ripped through Black Whip's hold and lunged at Aizawa with every intention on beating him to a pulp. Just like his first time saving Kakin, his body moved on his own and jumped in front of All Might's punch to prevent Aizawa from taking the full hit. As he predicted, his dad struck him with all the strength he could without the help of his quirk, which caused him to fly backwards into Aizawa. Shouta caught him as he folded into himself in pain while Yagi stopped moving altogether. Izuku tried to shake the pain while Aizawa kept one hand on his back and the other on his shoulder. "Why the hell would you do that, kid? I had it handled," Aizawa scolded as he tried to help Izuku through his waves of pain. "It looked like you needed help," Izuku responded as he slightly laughed nervously. Shouta growled lightly at Midoriya's stupid selfless attitude. Why is it that every time this kid helps someone, it always ends up with him being injured in some way? As Shouta fussed over Izuku, Yagi kept his regretful gaze on his son, still in shock that he struck him like that. He should have known Izuku would jump to help Aizawa, and yet he still hit him at his full force because he was stupid enough to allow his rage to guide him. Yagi then deflated back into his emasculated form, hating himself even more for striking his child like he was nothing more than a punching bag. Izuku looked up, feeling his dad's internal torment, which led him to slowly get up and make his way over to shake him from his self-punishment. He did what he always did in this situation and hugged his dad tightly to bring all of his attention onto him. Just like every other time, Yagi snapped out of it and wrapped his arms around his light, almost as if he would break him. Aizawa was right, I am being far too selfish when it comes to you. Yagi said in a near whisper. I'm becoming your prison guard at this point, and I'm only getting worse as time goes on. You should distance yourself as much as you can from me so you can finally move on with your mother. Izuku shook his head with tears prickling at his eyes once more. I won't be able to move on till you do, and you know that. I get that you aren't perfect, but no one is, not even the number one hero. The only thing I want is for you to trust me enough to make my own choices without having to worry about my safety all the time. He said, still keeping a tight hold. Yagi said nothing as he put his forehead to his son's, trying to stabilize his emotional state. He really needed to discuss Izuku's willingness to forgive so easily, but right now, he couldn't pass up this moment of peace. The moment was cut short when Aizawa cleared his throat, reminding them he was still here. Izuku jerked away with a deep blush and apologized, while Yagi narrowed his eyes once more towards Shouta. Noticing All Might's change in attitude, Aizawa sighed and began to try to make a truce. Look, I know I should have told you about involving Midoriya in the mission, but it would have never have gone as smoothly if we didn't use him. In my defense, we originally wanted to get you involved, but you obviously had your own opinion on the matter. Toshinori facepalmed as he grew tired of this constant back and forth. The only thing he wanted was to keep Izuku away from dangerous situations, and Aizawa was making that harder to achieve. He knew Izuku was a strong fighter and had no doubt that he could take down every villain that came his way, but his boy has been through so much pain in his life and he just wanted to save him from it, as much of it as possible. As he thought about what would happen next, Izuku started to look around frantically as he felt panic beginning to rise on his end. Whoa, hey, what's wrong now? Yagi said, confused about what's going on with his son. Ebony, where'd she go? Izuku asked in more panic. Yagi's eyes widened and started to look around as well, while Izuku started calling her name as he looked behind all of the bushes nearby. Aizawa reacted as well once he realized that Ebony was the name of Izuku's new dragon friend. He knew dragons were rare creatures that were on the verge of extinction, which made losing one worrisome. The villains that were after it was another concern because they would undoubtedly use it as a flying flamethrower on whoever they felt like. As all three of them continued their chaotic search, Izuku stopped and looked like he was listening for something. Both Yagi and Aizawa looked at him thinking he heard a noise that they didn't until he shot off like a rocket behind the apartment building. They both shouted Izuku's name as they ran after him, not knowing what was going on. Once the two pro heroes caught up, they were met with what looked like villains holding a distressed Ebony, along with a struggling Izuku wrapped in an iron chain. Both heroes got into their fighting stances ready to launch at them until they pulled out a weird-looking stick covered in what looked like white rock. It was odd at first till they held it against Izuku's neck, causing him to yell out in pain. This caused Shouta and Yagi to stop, not expecting this bizarre weapon to work against Izuku. I wouldn't do that, heroes, salt doesn't mix well with spirits. One of villains said with an evil grin. Yagi instantly grew enraged at seeing Izuku being held hostage and not being able to do anything about it. If you don't release them, you won't live to see tomorrow. Yagi said darkly. The villains just laughed, keeping the rock salt covered stick inches away from Izuku's neck. We all know that you don't have the guts to kill All Might, All for One is a great example of that. The villains holding Izuku said smugly. Izuku looked like he was getting weaker by the second as he loosened his body more and more. Aizawa saw this and began to worry about why he couldn't just phase through the chains. The villains holding him must have noticed because he smirked at him while pulling Izuku sharply. You really should research more about the weaknesses ghosts have. Iron sucks the energy out of spirits if you haven't already noticed. This kid ain't going anywhere while these are on him. He said matter-of-factly. Both heroes clenched their teeth in anger as a villain that looked like a human bird stepped forward. Thanks for the gifts, All Might, I promise I'll send my boss your regards. Buzzard said with a mocking bow. Who do you work for? Aizawa chimed in at the mention of this boss character. Wouldn't you like to know, Eraserhead? I know you all too well from your involvement in taking down his human trafficking rings. Buzzard said, unaware that he just told Aizawa what he wanted to know. You work for Nitro then? Shouta asked, trying to confirm his suspicions. Buzzard was clearly taken aback from how the underground hero figured out his boss's name, but realized it didn't matter at this point. He's been busy of late, but these new trophies will please him greatly for his future plans. He said as he gestured towards Izuku and Ebony again. Another wave of anger swept through Yagi as he narrowed his eyes at Buzzard, wanting to end him here and now. This little chat was fun, but we must be going. Buzzard informed as a mist-like cloud started to form around them. Izuku tried to use his quirk to stop whoever was teleporting them, but it was of no use. The one transporting them was obviously not in the group that was in front of them. Yagi tried to jump forward and grab Izuku before they disappeared, but was only met with more mist. As they fully vanished into the night, Yagi punched the ground with a shout, putting a massive hole in the pavement. Why? Why can't I protect my own son from the hands of villains? Am I that much of a shitty father and hero that I can't even save my own family? Yagi proclaimed as he felt tears beginning to form. Izuku knew self-pity was going to get them nowhere. They needed to get both Izuku and that dragon out of those villains' hands before they harmed them further. Shouta grabbed Yagi's shoulder to get his attention and told him what they needed to do next. Now is not the time for self-hatred, Yagi, we need to tell the others of what happened here. He said in an urgent tone. Yagi sat there for a second to compose himself until he slowly stood up with anger still clouding his mind. Once I find those bastards, it will be all over for them. He said with sadistic determination. We will have to first get UA involved to back us up in this. There is going to be loads of villains if I'm right about this, and we need to think clearly if we are going to get Izuku out safely. Shouta said, noticing Yagi's lack of logical thinking. Yagi didn't say anything as he jumped up high into the air going towards the direction of UA. Izuku sighed knowing this was going to be a one hell of a fight. That's it for today guys, hope you enjoyed this. If you did then please make sure to leave a like, share and do check it out author of this fanfic. Take care. Thanks for watching.